Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if every single character from Naruto was born in Remnant. Truth and justice, two words that are forever intertwined after they were first brought together. Beacon Academy, a place where the future hunters and huntresses are trained to fight the evil Grimm. However, this isn't your average high school, and these aren't your average students. Look out Beacon, Naruto Uzumaki's coming for ya. Welcome aboard. History. A few weeks had passed since their first day and like Naruto had promised Professor Ojban, they hadn't been late since. Team NHKS had just left the latest sparring class where an unfortunate John had been embarrassed once again by the school bully, Carden Winchester. In an effort to cheer John up, Kurama asked to slip away and retrieve something from their room and promised to meet up with the group in the lunchroom. What he returned with certainly brought joy, but not to John. In fact, the present confused John more than it did lift his spirits. There was only one person who did not enjoy the gift and that was Uchiha Sasuke. All of my hate. Sasuke glared daggers at his partner all throughout the lunch period. Why? The gift was a developed photo of the night he realized Haku was a boy. And to make matters worse. Don't worry, Sasuke, I made a copy just for you, Kurama said as he offered the photo to his partner with a grin plastered on his face. You know, Whisker Boy, I bet a bunch of girls will pay well for a few of these. Yang looked up from her photo and grinned at her fellow blonde as he ate his 10th bowl of ramen. Her comment didn't make Naruto pause, but he did hurry and finish the bowl with a satisfied sigh. Naruto looked at Yang with an arched brow. How much lean do you think it's worth? Concerning the posture and the amount of skin shown. Yang pursed her lips and closed her eyes before she grinned at the blonde seated across from her. 20 at least. You could see the lean sign appear in Naruto's eyes. Oh, wonderful, now he has a get-rich-quick scheme, Sasuke said dryly. He glowered at Blake. Your blonde is a bad influence on ours. Says the one that tried to grope his own teammate, Blake said just as dryly. She smirked when Sasuke groaned into his hand. So, can I get an estimate of all of our nudes? The blunt question from Naruto made Ruby, Haku, Para, Blake and Weiss turn the same shade as Ruby's hood. John was too out of it to really care. Rin and Nora were arguing about a dream Nora had, and both Sasuke and Kurama were far too used to Naruto's blunt personality to be thrown off guard by such a simple question. Yang tapped her chin. Well, for Haku, since he's such a popular trap, I'm guessing you could get 30 from some unaware guys and 40 from some girls. Expensive, aren't you? Kurama asked the feminine teen with a grin on his face. Haku sighed and turned to Ren. Are you sure you don't wish to switch teams? No, I need to keep an eye on Nora. Ren gave his friend a light smirk. He absent-mindedly slapped Nora's hands before she could grab the bottle of syrup that was set beside him. Young pointed at Kurama next. You'd probably bring in the least amount of currency, no offense. Maybe 10, 15 lean if you're lucky. Kurama shrugged and popped a fry in his mouth. You're all hideous apes to me. None taken. And me? Naruto asked with a small grin. Yang leaned forward and grinned back at him. I don't know, I'd need some fine details before I can give a proper estimate. Naruto let his eyes become half-lidded as his grin became a bit more lewd. I'm sure I can get my roommates to sleep somewhere else for a night. Yang's grin matched Naruto's own as she made similar eyes back at him. Why would they have to move? We have a spare bathroom. Okay, Yang, enough. Ruby put her proverbial foot down before she passed out from all the blood rushing to her head. She looked between the two blondes and huffed. If you two are going to flirt, that's fine, but come on, there are other people around us. So? Naruto and Yang asked with wide grins. The more the merrier. Ruby palmed her face and Weiss gave her partner a pat on the back. You walked right into that one, Ruby. I know. Ruby whimpered. Well, Yang and Naruto's jokes aside, we need to do something, Pyrrha said once she had let the blush on her face cool off. About what? John asked as he ate a chicken nugget. Pyrrha looked at him. You. And your problem with Carden. The teams looked over at a table where Carden and his crew had gathered around a faunus girl that had long brown hair and rabbit ears coming out of her head. Kurama growled and crushed the fry that was in his hand into mush. His aura flared and the mush was eradicated on the spot. Haku placed a hand on his shoulder while he sent Team CRDL a disapproving stare and then looked around in slight disgust. What? I don't have a problem with Carden. John scoffed and played with his food. He's just, playing around. He's being a bully. Ruby corrected her fellow team leader. She clenched her fists as she listened to the boy in question release a loud laugh. Name one time he bullied me, John said with a weak grin. Blake lifted her hand up as she began to list such occasions. There were the times he knocked books, food, or your scroll out of your hands. The times he forced your sheath to expand into a shield and get you caught in doorways. And let's not forget the rocket locker. Sasuke added. So? It was just a prank. Like Naruto does. John was cut off as Naruto's smile fell. A heavy feeling of death overcame the table as Naruto glared at John, who trembled under his friend's gaze. My pranks are not intentionally cruel nor do they aim to injure anyone. Naruto cut in firmly as he glared at his fellow blonde for daring to compare Carden's bullying antics to his masterpieces of vengeance. Please let go, Carden. It hurts. The teams turned to see Carden tugging on the rabbit ears of the faunus and Haku slapped his hand on the table. That does it. I can't just sit by and let this happen anymore. Haku scowled and made to rise, but was stopped by Naruto's hand. What are you doing? Stopping you from making a mistake. Naruto nodded towards the lunch monitor, who watched the interaction between CRDL and the faunus but made no move to break it up. Carden's bullying, but not in the terms that obligate any severe punishment from authority, and with the bias towards faunus, it's an even wider gap that he and others like him can slip through. If you go over there and start a fight, you'll be the one reprimanded. That doesn't make sense, it's keeping us from doing what's right, Ruby said with a frown. We all know that, Ruby, yet we all choose to do nothing as well for the same reason. Anyone could very well walk out and find a more tolerate teacher, but doing so could risk getting put up against the Winchester name, and that is a losing battle, Blake said. Nora slammed her hand into her palm as she gained an idea. We can break his legs. I wish, Kurama said with a scowl as he flicked his claws out and then forced them to recede in an effort to gain control of his anger. But like the others said, we'd just get in trouble for it. He looked at Weiss with a pointed frown. And you just don't care. Weiss frowned at him. I'm not fond of some faunus, true, but I do happen to think what Carden is doing is unnecessary and cruel. Maybe there's hope for you yet, Schnee. Kurama mused half-heartedly. He ignored the glare she sent his way. I cannot stand scum like that, Pyrrha said with a scowl as her fists tightened when Russell exclaimed his disbelief at the real ears on the girl's head. Those who abuse their power to wrong others. It's disgusting. Used to happen all the time back at Khan, Sasuke said solemnly with a frown on his face. I was part of it. Hey, you learned to better yourself. Kurama reassured his partner with a hand on the shoulder. He turned and glared as CRDL burst into more laughter when they knocked the faunus lunch out of her hands and kept her trapped between them. But something tells me that they never will. We can't just sit here and do nothing. Haku hissed. Naruto grinned as he stood up, a gleam in his eyes. Who said we were going to? Boys, let's go stop a bully. The four boys left the table consisting of teams RWBY and JNPR while the two teams watched them in interest. Naruto, Haku, Sasuke and Kurama walked up to Team CRDL and the rabbit-eared Faunus girl, careful to not attract attention to themselves as they did. Kurama and Sasuke seemed to know what Naruto had in mind, but Haku, with no clue what the plan was, decided to stand beside his team, be silently intimidating as he was taught to. "Hey guys, how's it going?" Naruto asked with a cheerful smile and wave as he stopped next to CRDL's leader. Carden looked up at the newcomer and glared at the fox Faunus that grinned maliciously at him. He smirked and looked back at his team while he pushed the Faunus girl into Sky, who kept her in place with a grip on her shoulders. "Oh, look boys, we have a few guys walking their pet." Russell, Dove and Sky started to laugh along with their leader at their joke but stopped and stared in shock as Naruto got in Carden's face with a hostile look in his eyes. "What? Wanna say that again? You wanna repeat that, you fucking prick? Huh? You wanna fucking start something?" Naruto shoved Carden back into the table and held his arms out while his team backed him up. Carden's eyes were wide and bewildered, as were those of his teammates, possibly due to the fact no one had stood up to them like this before. "Come on, 4-on-4, red versus blue, no camp kills. We'll fuck you up." "Jay, just calm down, Uzumaki." Dove tried to placate the irate student as eyes from around the room started to lock onto them. "Shut the fuck up, Dove." Naruto glared pointedly at the teen before he returned his attention to Team CRDL as a whole while he gestured to his team. "We're all pumped, we're ready to fucking go. Let's do this." Kurama snarled eagerly as his tail swished from one side to the other. To Team CRDL, it looked like something bright red flashed behind his wraparound sunglasses. "That's right, prison rules. Sasuke hasn't eaten in days." Naruto continued his crazed intimidation tactics that had drawn attention from all of the students within the lunchroom. He was so into the act that he hadn't realized all conversation had stopped and that a few teachers were even staring in shock at the spectacle. "I want the one in the middle," Sasuke intoned lowly as he stared at Sky intently. "Me, too," Naruto agreed as his smile widened. Team CRDL looked over their fellow first-year team. The Faunus grin had widened and his sharp teeth were in plain view. Sasuke continued to stare at Sky and even let his tongue wet his lips like one would when they were hungry just as Sky's eyes met his gaze. Haku just stared intently at them with wide eyes that sucked you in and slowly drove you mad. And finally, Naruto had the crazy gleam still present in his eyes and his smile had the same appearance, throw in the feral appearance his whiskers added and the scary factor was through the roof. "Nope," Russell yelled before he jumped out of the nearest window and ran away. Dove and Sky weren't that far behind him. Carden scrambled back, toppling over the table he'd be relaxing on in an effort to get away from the crazy students. As he ran away, Kurama purposefully made the sound of a whimpering dog loud enough for the whole lunchroom of students present to hear, which resulted in a roar of laughter. It certainly added humiliation to the defeat. "Yeah, that's right, you better fucking run away. You damn bastards." "Ha! Ha!" Naruto jeered over the laughter before he grinned and rubbed the underside of his nose with his thumb. "See? That wasn't so hard, was it, Haku?" "It was rather satisfying to be a part of that solution instead of the problem," Haku said with a smile. He turned and smiled further when he noticed the monitor quickly walking away, as though afraid Team NHKS would try to do something. "Humph, typical. Doesn't even bother to thank us for doing his job. Get used to it." Kurama scoffed as he followed Haku's gaze and shook his head before he approached the Faunus that Carden and his cronies had been bothering. With a gentle smile on his face, Kurama offered his fellow Faunus a hand to help her up. "Are you all right?" The girl averted her eyes as a small flush crossed her face as she took the offered grip and got back to her feet. "Why yes. Thank you. It's no problem." Kurama smiled at her and she smiled back. "So, Kurama, who's your girlfriend?" Sasuke asked with a smirk on his face. The girl flushed dark red and began to stutter incoherently while Kurama scowled in his partner's direction. Kurama lifted a photo up and arched a brow above the ridge of his glasses. Try me, Uchiha. I can make sure this thing gets spread all throughout Beacon before we go to history. Yeah, come on man, how can you tease someone so cute? Naruto added with a grin as he hung off Sasuke's shoulders. The Faunus girl flushed a darker red at his question and began to fiddle with her fingers. Sasuke scowled for a moment before he sighed. I suppose you're right. She is rather cute, isn't she? Of course she is. Otherwise Kurama wouldn't be acting so nice right now. Hey! Watch it, Uzumaki, before I show you how nice I can be. Kurama warned with a growl as his two friends grinned at him. Haku shook his head as the three spiraled into an argument and smiled at the girl. Can you tell me your name, miss? V Velvet Scarlatina, the girl, Velvet, said softly. Why do you want to know? Haku gave his signature gentle smile as he offered his hand. So that I may know the name of my new friend. Our new friend. Naruto corrected with a grin on his face and his hands interlocked behind his head. Velvet seemed shocked by this while Naruto chuckled. After all, someone this cute needs to be shared. Wow, that sounded creepy, Naruto. Kurama drawled with his arms crossed over his chest. Naruto hung his head. Realized it as soon as I said it. Well, Naruto's unintentional creepy comment aside, we do want to be your friend, Kurama said. He waved at her with his tail and smiled lightly when she giggled. After all, we Faunus gotta stick together when we're surrounded by these hairless apes. Ah, but you love us, Kurama. Haku smiled at his friend. Kurama looked away slightly. Don't make it weird, Haku. Velvet just giggled a bit more as she spoke with Team NHKS, happy that she'd made a few more friends. The more I see it, the less I believe it, Naruto said to Sasuke as they watched their history professor zip from one place to another with a small cup of coffee in hand. I'm starting to wonder what would happen if you pranked him through his coffee, Sasuke said. Professor Bartholomew Oblek was never seen without a cup of some sort of caffeinated drink in hand, and many wondered if it had replaced his blood. Naruto nodded. I considered it, but I think he's an addict. The withdrawal could be agonizing for him. Like that one day we ran out of ramen in Kan. Sasuke shuddered. There was a reason neither Sasuke nor Kurama tried to curb or mess with Naruto's addiction. He could still hear the sirens to this day. Shush. Pyrrha chastised the two as they listened to their green-haired professor. Therefore, the Faunus Rights Revolution, or more popularly known as the Faunus War, was believed by many to be ignited by humanity's attempts to contain the Faunus on menagerie. And while this may seem like ancient history to many of you, it still has its mark on recent events. Professor Oblek rapidly explained. He zipped, not ran or walked because his legs never seemed to move, to stand in front of the class with his left hand folded behind his back. Repercussions can still be seen to this day. He paused and zipped to the side of the room in order to sip from his small cup politely before he returned to the front of the class. Now, have any of you been subjugated to discrimination because of your Faunus heritage? A few in the class hesitated before Kurama, seated at the front next to the nearly trembling form of Velvet, raised his hand casually. Sasuke grimaced and Naruto gave him a small nudge. Kurama had already forgiven the Uchiha for his past actions, and it was time that Sasuke did so as well. Naruto looked back down his Velvet's hand and a few others around the room slowly or meekly followed their friend's example. Dreadful, simply dreadful. The manner that Oblek spoke sounded insensitive to those that weren't familiar with the man's eccentrics. It made Naruto smile lightly to see more and more people agree with the professor. He let out an annoyed grunt when Carden, who was seated behind a sleeping John with his legs on the desk, snorted in amusement. There was a crackle beside him and Naruto had to grab Sasuke's left arm in order to remind his friend that they were in class. Sasuke's hand let the static wear off, but the look in his eyes did not fade away. Remember class, it is exactly this kind of ignorance that breeds violence, Oblek said before he once more took a sip from his cup. Oobleck started to gesture with his pointer. I mean, just look at the White Fang for instance. Can anyone tell me what they know about the organization's history? To the surprise of those outside of Kurama and Sasuke, Naruto lifted his hand up. Ah, yes, Mr. Uzumaki. Oobleck nodded as the boy stood to speak. The White Fang was formed after the Faunus Rights Revolution to promote unity between Faunus and humanity. Despite most discriminations still holding firm in place, many of their peaceful public displays or marches were very effective. Naruto frowned as he continued. However, around the time that the Fourth War, the anti-Faunus terrorist organization, came to be, more and more humans pinned the blame on the attacks of the Fourth War on the Faunus. Consequential riots and the rumors of the Shi Company slavery incidents were enough to turn the White Fang into a bastardization of what it once was. Blake, Weiss and Pyrrha were shocked at the passion that came from Naruto's mouth as he expressed disappointment with the turn of the White Fang. Professor Oobleck, however, nodded his head. Precisely. Violence begets violence, an unfortunate truth for our world, and without true understanding, there can be no peace, as Rikudo Sage, the infamous visionary during the war, said. Thank you, Mr. Uzumaki, you may be seated. Naruto sat down and gave a cheesy grin as well as a victory sign to the surprised people that stared at him. Sasuke smirked and shook his head in amusement. Naruto may not understand technical use of theories or mathematics in the real world, but politics, tactics and history was something he had a knack for. If he wasn't so determined to be a huntsman, Sasuke was sure that his team's leader could run for placement on one of the Four Kingdoms councils. Ah, hell, he was going to suggest that the blonde do so later in life anyway. But back to the matter at hand, which of you young scholars can tell me what battle is believed by theorists to be the turning point of the Faunus Rights Revolution and when it occurred during the war? Oobleck asked. He looked over the class and nodded. Ms. Schnee? The battle at Fort Castle, which took place in the third year, Weiss said with a confident smile. Very good. Oobleck nodded from where he stood behind his desk. And who can tell me the advantage the Faunus had over General Lagoon's forces? Sasuke looked to the left as Carden snickered and prepared a paper football to flick at the back of John's head. His eyes narrowed and he waited for the right moment to send a small bolt of static at the paper in an effort to both crumple it and knock it off path. Carden frowned and let out an annoyed grunt, which drew Oobleck's attention. Yes, Mr. Winchester? Carden looked up and crossed his arms as a smile crossed his face. I don't know about you, but I personally think it's because animals are easier to train than soldiers. Coming from the epitome of dumb apes, I'm not surprised you think that way. I wonder how long it took for your mommy to potty train you. Kurama quipped with a smirk on his face while the class let out snickers. Mr. Otsutsuki, please wait to be called on before you speak out of turn or I'll be forced to offer you detention. Mr. Winchester, your answer is not only incorrect but highly offensive and very ignorant. For this, I will ask for a 3-page essay on the contents of the Faunus Rights Act, with explicit details on each right granted to Faunus in the Four Kingdoms due on my desk next week, Professor Oobleck said as he chastised both students fairly in terms of their offense. Carden scowled heavily while Kurama gave a nod to the professor. Now, can anyone tell me the correct answer to the question? Professor Oobleck asked before he took another sip of his coffee. He nodded as Pyrrha's hand rose. Yes, Ms. Nikos? It's because most Faunus have exceptional night vision. General Lagoon tried to ambush the Faunus in the night and was consequently outmaneuvered and captured for his mistake. Pyrrha explained. She sent a look at Carden for a moment before she looked back at the front. If he had actually taken time to think of a better strategy than the easiest one that came to mind, perhaps he could have emerged victorious. Or perhaps if he paid attention in class, like a certain few who shan't be named, he wouldn't have been turned into the butt of every Faunus joke, Blake said dryly. The students snickered once again as the obvious jab to a certain mace user. You want to start something, Belladonna? Carden asked as he started to rise. Mr. Winchester, get back in your seat before I make that essay 10 pages long and due tomorrow, and Ms. Belladonna, I will give you the same warning that I gave Mr. Otsutsuki, wait to be called on before you speak or I will give you a detention for disrupting my class, Oobleck said with a frown. He zipped to the front of the class and slapped his pointer stick next to John, who snapped awake with a startled cry. Mr. Ark, since you've decided to finally rejoin us in the world of the living and conscious, I would like to know what you think about the Faunus War? It was a boon to the Faunus and I'm glad it happened? John weakly answered. Oh, and why is that? Oobleck asked with an arched brow. Well, if the Faunus never stood up for their rights then they would have been trapped on Mallory Dash. Menagerie. Right, that. And I never would have met some of my friends. Heck, I probably wouldn't even have the thought of calling them my friends. John's answer drew smiles on his friends' faces while Professor Oobleck withdrew his pointer stick and nodded. A good answer, Mr. Ark, but I will still require you and Mr. Winchester to stay after class for a moment. The disheveled professor took a sip of his coffee and zipped to his desk just before the bell rang. You're all dismissed, save for you two. John groaned and let his head fall to the desk while Carden scoffed and crossed his arms. Then I thought about using some rope to. Wait up, Uzumaki. Naruto, Sasuke, Kurama, and Velvet were walking down the hall towards Haku's history classroom. The feminine boy had placed above average in the class and had been moved a grade forward, which was more or less a boon for his team. Haku's kind attitude made it all but impossible for the boy to say no to helping his friends study for one of their, in his words, easier tests. The three members of NHKS and Velvet stopped and turned back around to see Weiss and Blake running after them. Hey Sneeze! Belle! Just on our way to meet up with Haku, what's up? Naruto grinned at the girls while Sasuke stared indifferently and Kurama let out a small growl of annoyance. Weiss scowled at the blonde and crossed her arms over her chest. For the last time, it's Shni, Uzumaki. And I told you to call me Naruto, Sneeze. Naruto returned with a grin while Kurama smirked and Velvet let out a soft giggle. Weiss growled, but quickly shook her head. Whatever, I'll deal with that later. What was all of that back in the classroom? That was history with Professor Oobleck, Naruto said as he gained a worried look as he placed a hand on her head. Are you all right? I mean, didn't you answer one of his questions? Very funny. Weiss drawled through gritted teeth while she batted his hand away. She glared at the snickering Kurama. And what's so funny, Otsutsuki? Your face. Kurama chuckled as Weiss looked to be seconds from a meltdown. Velvet frowned at her new friend. Tea that wasn't very nice, Kurama, Velvet said softly. Kurama crossed his arms over his chest and turned his head to face the timid girl. Vel, trust me. This is a Shni. She's used to this sort of thing. What we mean to ask is, how did you know so much about the White Fang, Naruto? Blake quickly spoke up before her teammate tried to fight the Fox Faunus again. Naruto's smile fell into a frown. It's hard not to know about the White Fang when you come from a village that used to welcome them. Used to? Blake and Weiss asked. Sasuke nodded. We, Naruto, Kurama and I, are from the city of Kan in Vacuo. It's a pretty popular town on the edge of the desert and the mountain regions. It's also where a majority of the old White Fang organization had started, so a lot of Faunus used to live there with humans. The Faunus were treated well, until an attack that happened almost 18 years ago, Naruto said softly. He had his eyes down as he started to fiddle with the rings on his necklace. After that, many in Kan blamed the Faunus for the attack and a few were chased out of town. My family lived on neutral ground and my father ran a shop that provided a lot of dust to the area. Kurama added. He had his arms crossed and his hands clenched into fists. We barely managed to survive thanks to the few humans that remembered their bonds with him. Sasuke put his hand on Kurama's shoulder and looked at the two stunned girls. But that's the past, and we've come to terms with it. Naruto let his necklace drop from his hands and a smile spread across his face. Yeah, gotta keep moving forward. Besides, Kurama said as he relaxed and a small smirk crossed his face. We all made a promise before we arrived at Beacon. Once we became huntsmen we would find the fourth war and bring them down. Naruto nodded in agreement while Sasuke gained a small smirk at Kurama's words. That's all we needed to know, Blake said before she grabbed Weiss' arm and dragged her along. Come on, let's go find Ruby and Yang before they do something stupid. Wait, will you unhand me? Blake. Weiss argued and struggled as she was pulled away. Naruto watched them disappear around a corner and scratched the back of his head. Think we laid it on a little thick? We were just being honest, Velvet, are you crying? Kurama asked as he looked at the rabbit-eared faunus. Her eyes were red and brimmed with tears while her bottom lip trembled. Suddenly, she pulled Kurama into a tight hug that caught the fox faunus off guard. Whoa! Hey, Velvet! Don't cry! Kurama paled as the girl sobbed into his shoulder. He turned to his friends. Guys? Help! Sasuke crossed his arms and shook his head. Shame on you, Kurama. Making such a cute girl cry. Naruto copied the raven-haired boy's actions. For shame. Screw you guys. Velvet, come on, it's okay. Kurama tried to console her weakly. He'd never had to do this before. Girls were not his forte, even if he did flirt around occasionally. Shame, Kurama Otsutsuki, for shame. Naruto and Sasuke repeated as they walked down the hall. Oi! Don't leave me here. You bastards. What happened to your shirt? Haku asked as a slightly drenched Kurama and a red-eyed Velvet joined him, Sasuke and Naruto. With them were 3 other second-year students. Only one was girl with a beret atop her shoulder-length brown hair and her eyes hidden by sunglasses, dressed in Beacon's standard academy uniform like velvet. Slightly behind her were 2 boys, one with dark skin, white eyes and messy copper hair and the other was, to be blunt, a giant with short dark hair and a friendly face. Both boys wore the traditional uniform that Team NHKS rebelled against, save for Haku. Velvet flushed bright red and Kurama glared at the amused Naruto and Sasuke. I hate you both. So much. He growled as his tail flicked angrily. Well, Velvet, I never thought you'd be so interested in younger boys, the girl said with a smirk as she walked over towards the faunus. She gave Kurama a once-over before she pulled Velvet into a hug. I'm so proud of you, he's succulent. And no, Sikoko, it's not like that. Velvet protested as her face darkened even further. I'm sure it's not. Coco nodded with a smirk on her face as she lowered her sunglasses and leered at the other members of Team NHKS with a saucy grin on her face. I'm glad you were only with one of these gold medals, because if you were keeping all 4 to yourself, I would be so mad at you. Fox can only handle so much, after all. The copper-haired teen let out a soft sigh while the giant chuckled. Coco looked over at Naruto and gave him a smile. Like I was saying, I'm Coco Adele. She pointed at the giant. That handsome beefcake is Yatsuhashi Daichi. Her finger landed on the copper-haired teen. That fine piece of ass is Fox Alistair and you already know our lovely little rabbit, Velvet. She grinned and tightened her hug around the flushed faunus. Together were Team CFVY, Coffee, second-year badass hunters of Beacon. Nice to meet you, Coco. Naruto grinned as Kurama slipped over to Sasuke's other side and Haku stepped beside the blonde leader. You already know my partner Haku Yuki. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, Velvet's boyfriend is Kurama Otsutsuki Hei. And his partner Uchiha Sasuke. We're Team NHKS. An all-boy group filled with one of each kind, Coco said with a smile and a giddy sigh. She pointed at Sasuke. The sexy dark one. Her finger drifted to Kurama. Velvet's piece of man-meat is the handsome, mysterious, and wild one. Coco ignored Velvet's squeak as she pointed at Haku. Our princely quiet one is my studious classmate. Coco's gaze landed on the younger leader and she approached him with a smirk on her face. And finally, the roguishly cute leader. Naruto's smile fell into a pout. Oi! I'm not cute. Coco laughed and pinched his cheek as she cooed at him. Yes, you are. Such a cute little huntsman in training. Kurama smirked. Ah, Karma. How I love you. Naruto batted away the older girl's hand and scowled as he rubbed his sore whiskered cheek. Coco pinched hard. Geez, if this is what Ruby feels like when Yang teases her, maybe I should cut her some slack. I didn't think it was possible. Someone can curb him. Sasuke mumbled in shock. Haku shook his head. He'd known Coco, Fox and Yatsuhashi only in passing during class, but when Coco had said something afterwards about a few boys that had stood up for their fondest teammate, he spoke to her afterwards and introduced himself, asking if their friend was Velvet. From there on, Coco had poised herself as a playful teenage girl, not unlike Yang, but more mature and sure of herself. He figured that the introduction between Coco and Naruto would be healthy for his laid-back and childish partner. Haku wasn't expecting her to all but adopt Naruto as her cute little brother. That didn't mean Haku wasn't welcoming it. He was chuckling alongside Sasuke and Kurama as their leader, who was brimming with confidence and always flirty with the opposite sex, suddenly became a slightly unnerved boy and struggled to get away from the older girl. Oh, but you're everything I ever wanted in a little brother. Coco pleaded as she rubbed her cheek against Naruto's. Cute, sassy, and a troublemaker. She tightened her hug and looked at her teammates. Fox? Yatsuhashi? Can we keep him? Oi! Let me go. Fox shook his head with a smirk on his face while Yatsuhashi chuckled and rubbed the back of his neck. Well. The gentle voice of the giant teen left his throat with a small rumble. As long as you promise to take care of him. Coco smiled happily and tightened her impressive grip on Naruto, causing his face to go blue. I promise. I take back any negative thoughts I had about today. Kurama chuckled out with a smile as he watched his friend try to escape Coco's grasp. This is the best day of my life thus far, hands down. Agreed. Sasuke nodded. Haku smiled. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Gah! Gah! Let me go, you crazy lady. Guys. As your leader, I order you to help me. No, Naruto. Stay with Sister Coco. Haku. Help. Best day ever. Kurama reiterated. 6. The Art of Breaking Legs. Naruto stood beside his team's bedroom door with his ear pressed against it while the rest of his team prepared for the following morning. They were being taken on a field trip of sorts with teams RWBY, JNPR, and CRDL. It had been a week since NHKS had scared CRDL away from the lunchroom and befriended the older team CFVY, but during recent nights, Naruto had noticed that John, for some reason, was returning later and later with every day that passed. Anything yet? Kurama asked as he cleaned the barrel of Rikudo's rifle mode. All of the new teams were aware of JNPR's leader's bizarre new habit and all were worried, aside from the members of CRDL, which made all of Naruto's team suspicious. With the thanks of skilled subterfuge and vast connections, Kurama had been able to gander a few guesses as to what was going on with PJ. No, not yet. Naruto frowned. He looked over at Haku. Do it. Haku nodded and sat on his bed with his legs crossed and his eyes closed. Haku lifted his hands up and formed a rectangle with his thumbs and index fingers. It was a theorized ability suggested by Sasuke when Haku revealed more details about his mirrors. In essence, Haku would make a smaller mirror, which he dubbed a looking glass that was invisible to the naked eye and allowed him to see areas he had been to before. The three members of the team had been practicing it without Naruto to keep an eye on him when he was obviously pranking someone. Naruto soon caught on and, with news of this ability, decided to put it to good use when rumors of Carden and John hanging out started to spread through the first-year circle. While Kurama argued he could determine whether or not John and Carden were together, Naruto pointed out that Kurama couldn't see what they were doing. Kurama's sensory was impressive, but it could not determine what someone was doing, just where they were. Haku's eyes snapped open, though they looked like they were focused on something distant and far away. It's as we feared, John is with Carden and his team. Can you see what they're doing? Sasuke asked as he sharpened his sword, Amaterasu, with a block of special dust-laced clay. Haku narrowed his eyes. John seems to be writing, Carden and Russell are laughing, Dove is meditating in sky, just spilled something on the parchment John was writing on. What a bunch of jerks. Kurama growled as he slapped a clip of ammunition into Rikudo. Something needs to put them out of our misery. It's not that simple, Kurama. You know that, Naruto said with a sigh. The world was full of red tape and thin lines that made the black and white hard to see. He clenched his fists and grit his teeth. Damn it, if only we knew what they had on him to force him to do this. It's either something embarrassing about his family or something he did that he doesn't want anyone to know about, Sasuke said as he lifted his sword and examined the edge of the blade. Possibly the latter, Kurama said with a sigh as he set Rikudo down on the ground beside his bed and relaxed. Well, we could always go missing tomorrow and prompt Goodwitch to call for a search party. Ambush them. We're not killing anyone, Kurama. Naruto deadpanned. I never said kill. Kurama smirked lightly as he rolled his hand in the air. I said ambush, if something happens after that, well, it's out of our hands. Hands, isn't it? The last time you tried that they somehow survived, Sasuke said pointedly. Kurama smirked darkly as he clenched his fist in the air. Yes, but this time. I won't leave them with any aura. We're not killing them. Naruto glared at the fox faunus. Alright, fine, but we can't let them go on like this. They could get hundreds of people killed down the line if they continue to act like Dash. The Fourth War. I know. Naruto cut Kurama off. We're just students, though, Kurama. It's Ajpin and the rest of the faculty we need to convince that they're not fit to be hunters. They can put a stop to CRDL's rise before it even begins. We could do that. Kurama mumbled. Kurama. Naruto warned. I know. Geez, I'm just saying. John just left their room. Haku closed his hands and waited for a moment before he lifted them again. He's on his way down the hall. Thanks Haku, you can break the glass, Naruto said with a smile before he pressed his ear against the door and closed his eyes. Team NHKS went quiet as the leader of the four listened through the door. Naruto opened his eyes when he heard floorboards creak softly by and grabbed the handle, but stopped when he heard something else. What are you Dash? SHH. Naruto cut Sasuke off as he faintly heard the other members of Team JNPR talking. John must have been trying to sneak in again, but found that his team was still awake. There was another soft creak that Naruto arched a brow to, followed by soft footsteps that were next door. Naruto waited for another few minutes before he smiled lightly and released the door handle. What are you doing? What about the plan? Sasuke asked as Naruto walked back to his bed. Plans change, Sasuke. Naruto simply replied as he climbed into bed and turned off his light. His teammates seemed to follow his example and turned their lights off as they prepared for bed. As he closed his eyes and prepared to reimburse himself in the world of Ramenland, Naruto had one final thought. You're a good friend, Ruby. Man, and I thought there were a lot of bloody trees back home, Kurama said under his breath as he, Haku and Sasuke followed their team's leader through the red-leafed forest of Forever Fall. Naruto had decided to walk with John behind Team CRDL, who were all very unimpressed with the area, while the odd teams are WBY and JNPR followed Professor Goodwitch ahead of them. Yes, the forests of Forever Fall are indeed beautiful, Mr. Otsutsuki, Professor Goodwitch said, her words showing that she had misheard the faunus. But we are not here to embrace nature's beauty. Professor Peach has requested that all of you take samples from the trees deep inside this forest, and I am here to ensure that none of you die in the process. Professor Goodwitch stopped walking and turned to face the students behind her, her eyes washing over them intently. Naruto grabbed John's shoulder to keep him from walking into Carden, who hung at the back of his team unlike the leaders of RWBY and NHKS. John sent Naruto a weak thankful smile that Naruto returned before they looked ahead as the professor continued with her instructions. Each of you is to gather 1 jar's worth of red sap, however be aware that there are creatures of Grimm in this forest. If you wish not to die, I would strongly recommend you stick with your teammates, she said. Professor Goodwitch adjusted her glasses and let her hands fall behind her back. We will rendezvous back here at 4 o'clock. Have fun. Fun. Is she bipolar? Sasuke asked his partner quietly. Kurama shrugged and took a jar from John when he started to hand the supplies out. Once all the supplies were dealt out and Professor Goodwitch walked off to answer a question that Blake had, Carden clapped a hand on John's shoulder with a grin on his face. Come on, buddy, let's go. John looked to his team, who started to walk in a different direction than Team CRDL, and his eyes locked with Pyrrha's. Just as John broke the gaze they held and prepared to go with the other 4, another hand grabbed Carden's armored wrist. I believe Professor Goodwitch said for us to join our teammates. Haku's eyes were intense as he looked into the taller boys. His hand slowly clenched until the armor bound around Carden's wrist started to groan in protest, which greatly alarmed the wearer of the medal. You are not John's teammates. Why yeah, but John's offered to help my team, Carden said quickly. When? Haku asked firmly, his slowly tightening grip not stopping in the slightest. Before we got on the bullhead, John said softly, resigned as he put a hand on Haku's shoulder. He gave the boy a weak smile. It's fine, Haku, really. The others, they said it was okay. It was a horrible lie and everyone knew it. Haku stared at John for a moment before he sighed and released Carden's wrist. Very well, John, but if you need any help, we'll be right there. Naruto finished from where he stood with his arms around Dove and Sky's shoulders and his head down. Both teens were sweating bullets as the crazed whiskered blonde grinned at their team leader. Kurama and Sasuke, likewise, had their arms around Russell, who was nearly hyperventilating as Kurama grinned at him and his concealed eyes flashed red once more. Carden quickly backed away from the other all-male team and swallowed. CC-mon, Johnny boy. Time's a-wastin'. The rest of Team CRDL was quick to follow their leader's example and disappeared into the forest in a forced calm walk with John not too far behind them. Naruto waited until they disappeared beyond a tree before he looked at Haku. Go. Kurama, Sasuke, follow from the leaves and keep me informed. Naruto's orders were soft, but heard all the same as Haku closed his eyes and backed into a mirror that formed behind him. He vanished from view just as Kurama and Sasuke disappeared into the trees. Naruto crossed his arms and stood in the clearing with his eyes closed before he looked to his left at the sounds of leaves crunching under feet. Professor. He greeted with a nod. The silver-haired headmaster nodded back and let his right arm rest behind him while the left kept a grip on his cane. He had snuck onto the bullhead with relative ease after the student before him had visited him in the early hours of the morning prior to the departure. With a few offered testimonies and the many concerns of blackmailing brought forward, he decided to humor the young man and see if there really was any problem. Bullying was not that unusual for a school, but he had been getting reports of intense instances from a few other teachers, Port and Oblek to be precise. They normally didn't question his decisions, and to have them do so was how Ashbin had felt something was off. Mr. Uzumaki. Are you sure this is necessary? Naruto kept his jaw square and looked up at the headmaster with a cold stare. Professor, if you let CRDL continue to be students at Beacon, not only will it worsen the students' relations with one because of their blatant racism, but if they somehow, forbid, manage to graduate, your school will be blamed after the first mission where they allowed innocents to die just so they could survive. Professor Ashbin pursed his lips and his jaw twitched before he sighed. I was afraid of this. Thank you for asking me before you did something. I've heard rumors of Khan Academy's final year lessons and I was afraid that you would act in a poorly devised manner. The goal of every graduated student at Khan Academy is to protect the citizens of Remnant from Grimm, terrorists, or even other hunters if necessary. Naruto quietly recited from memory as he looked off towards where Team CRDL had gone. He looked back at the headmaster with a stern glare. I'm not the smartest guy in the world and I'm pretty sure I'm not the strongest, but I can read a person. I can tell what drives most people. Team CRDL is in this for the fame, riches, and glory. If we do stop them and they can be rehabilitated, what then? Ashbin asked. Naruto kept his gaze on the headmasters. If you let any of those four become a hunter of Remnant, the people that they let die, and people will die, will be on your head. Professor Ashbin sighed for a moment before he smiled at the young man before him. You are certainly your parents' son, Mr. Uzumaki. If they were still with us, they would be very proud of you. Naruto's serious look and frown vanished as he gained a small smile and looked up at the cloudless sky. I certainly hope so. The peaceful quiet between headmaster and first-year student was broken when Haku stepped back into the clearing with a frown on his face. What did you find out? Naruto asked. Carden's goal is revenge, Haku said as his hands clenched hard until his knuckles turned white. He tried to get John to release a swarm of rapier wasps on Pira and Blake and has mentioned that he's still trying to figure out something for us. You said tried, Mr. Yuki? Ashbin arched a brow. Please explain. John refused to conform to Carden's plan. Carden didn't take it well. He began to beat John, and the others soon joined in. Haku answered as he glared at nothing in particular. His hands had balled into white kunkled fists and he turned to Naruto. I'm with Kurama. We should stop this now. Ashbin hummed. And why don't you? I was not taught in Khan Academy, but in one of the sister schools of Vacuo. Haku answered as he looked back at the headmaster. We do not act without our team leader's permission or word unless our lives or the lives of others are at risk. It is a lesson that is taught during the final year. We'll be revisiting that bit of information later. Naruto crossed his arms and looked at the headmaster. What's your say, Professor O? I wish I had a cup of Atlas coffee right now. Ashbin sighed and looked up at the sky. Things are much easier to decide when one is fully caffeinated and awake. However, I've just discovered that one of my teams is abusing another student and plans to harm others. He brought his free hand up to rub his eyes. If I had a bunch of hard evidence before me gathered by a concerned teacher, my authority over the subject would be absolute, but alas, I do not. I cannot act on mere hearsay and testimonies with any assurance that they will be removed from the program. Haku scowled and made to speak, only for his partner to stop him. Haku gave Naruto a confused look and was shocked to see a grin on the whiskered teen's face. What can you do? Naruto asked with a fake sigh as his smile grew. It's not like a blackmailer can be threatened. No. Indeed it is not. For anyone to know that I, Professor Ashbin, allowed one John Ark to come to my prestigious academy despite the fact his application and transcripts were falsified, could bring about my end. Ashbin sighed dramatically. If only I had a way to ensure that the information never became public, but to do so would possibly involve crude and inhumane tactics brought upon the would-be blackmailer. Naruto's grin widened. Professor Ashbin, I believe that your problem will soon rectify itself, and besides, John Ark has proven to not be clever enough to trick you, so there must be a reason that the great and wonderful Ashbin allowed such a student to attend his academy. If I had ever to answer that question, I would say that politics had swayed me when I informed the parents and a certain influential member of the Ark family. Ashbin pressed his hand against his forehead and began to woefully walk away. Woe is me, for I am without a clear answer to my problem. If only there were a few generous students that could possibly heal any bruises and quiet the problem for me without any permanently hurt feelings. Naruto looked at Haku as Ashbin disappeared back towards the bullhead and nodded. Now we can go deal with them. What was that? Haku asked in mild surprise. That was our unofficial permission to, as Nora so elegantly put it, break Team CRDL's legs. Naruto answered as he walked off towards the area CRDL had gone to. Haku followed after him. I don't understand. Professor Ashbin was putting on a show, but why? He can't outright say that he wants us to ensure that Team CRDL doesn't try to blackmail anyone again. Naruto explained to his partner. He grinned. One has to learn how to look underneath the underneath if they wish to find the truth. Haku frowned. My academy never had those lessons. It was a recent development in Khan Academy after the terrorist attack, Naruto said softly. Haku nodded. I see, so, what exactly did Professor Ashbin say? Naruto held his hand up and began to list off the subjects Ashbin's speech covered. 1. He can't do anything to CRDL officially without a written proof of evidence from a teacher, so we can't get them kicked until we get some dirt on them. 2. Ashbin knew that John faked his transcripts and even informed his parents and possibly someone with more influence in the Ark family, so even if John's secret gets let out, Ashbin has a plan to deal with any backlash on himself, his school or even the Arks. And finally, Ashbin gave us the go-ahead to stop Carden and his cronies as long as we don't permanently injure them. Did he really say all of that? Haku asked with a frown. Naruto nodded and Haku furrowed his brow. But what about Professor Goodwitch? Naruto chuckled. Why do you think she's really here? Our talents as hunters are being honed, not taught for the first time. We've all proven that we have the skills to take care of ourselves and each other. Didn't you notice how odd it was that she showed up this morning instead of Professor Peach? Her presence meant that Ashbin took our words seriously and she'll make sure that teams JNPR and RWBY don't try to get in our way or worse, try to help. Haku frowned. Why is that worse? 3 teams ganged up on another? We'd be no better than Team CRDL and our case would be in the trash sooner than you can say burnt ramen. Naruto lifted a finger and smiled. But 2 all-male teams suddenly got into a fight? Boys will be boys, I suppose. Haku nodded and sent a small smile to his partner. You've got a very tactical and underhanded mind in there, Naruto. I don't know what you're talking about, Haku. Naruto smirked as he lowered his hand and quickened his walk. Tell Sasuke and Kurama that I want Team CRDL separated from the others. Haku nodded and made a mirror in front of him that he stepped into while Naruto followed the small trail that Sasuke made with his sword. Carden burst through the forest into the next clearing and doubled over to catch his breath. He stood up and glared at his team. Wow, guys, thanks for sticking around. If Johnny Boy hadn't managed to distract that Grimm for me, I'd be dead right now. Russell pointed at him as he stood up from where he leaned against a tree. You saw that thing. That Ursa was freaking enormous. All of those spikes. Dove shuddered and rubbed his arms. Skylark looked at Carden with an arched brow. So, Carden, with that plan gone to shreds, how do you plan to get back at Uzumaki and his team? I'm still thinking about it, alright? The tall boy rubbed his ruined gauntlet with his other hand and scowled. But I do know that I'm going to make that Haku freak wish he hadn't wrecked my armor. This stuff cost me an entire month's allowance to be made. I do apologize. The sudden words made the 4 boys freeze and dart their eyes over to the side as Haku stepped out of one of his mirrors to their left. Haku had a pleasant smile on his face as he held Snowfall in gun form towards them. I must request that you don't try to run. Or else what? You going to shoot us with that puny thing? Skylark asked with a sneer as he and his teammates drew their weapons. He twirled his collapsed halberd in his hand and smirked at the feminine boy. You know, I always wanted to find out if you were actually a chick despite your words. We can find out right now, Russell said with a grin as he lifted up his daggers. If not, well, then you're just a cross-dressing freak. That's just sick, Dove said with a grimace while he aimed his short sword at Haku. Almost as disgusting as sharing a room with a faunus. Carden and the others chuckled at Dove's burn. Nice one. Their smiles fell as slow clapping came from behind them. Team CRDL turned and faced Kurama as he stepped out from behind a tree. Ah, ho 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 ho, hee. Kurama's grin widened as his unnerving and sarcastic chuckle put the four bullies on edge. What's wrong, Dove? No more jokes? He hissed in disappointment as he pulled his staff Rikudo forward from where it rested in his arms. Kurama tightened his grip and the blades that dangled from the rings aligned at the top to make the spear mode. That's a shame, and here I thought you were the comedy group. You're always making such witty and clever jokes about us faunus. Why you stay back? Russell warned as Kurama stopped on the edge of the clearing opposite Haku. He remembered passing out in the forest and it was not an experience he wanted to go through again. There's just two of them, Russell, relax. Carden chided his partner with a scowl before he smirked at Kurama and tightened his grip on his mace. I've been waiting to knock that smile off of your face since we first met. Then once we're done with you two, we're going to find that pretty boy partner of yours and kick his ass, too. I assume then that you would mean me? Carden's smirk fell and color drained from his teammates' faces as they turned to Sasuke, who stood on the edge of the clearing directly between Haku and Kurama. His weapon was in its sword form and what looked like black lightning arced around his hands and up the blade. Threatening to beat up two of my teammates, that's dumb, Sasuke said slowly as he held Amaterasu in front of him. He smirked at the four. However, it's far from the worst mistake you made today. None of the members of Team CRDL could speak before the space opposite Sasuke was occupied as the team leader of Team NHKS stepped from the forest while he cracked his knuckles. Naruto grinned at the four teens and began to loosen his joints. You see, Carden, your biggest mistake was thinking that you could get away with not only blackmailing one of our friends, but trying to hurt or possibly kill the others. Carden's eyes widened and his team backed into each other, each looking at different members of Team NHKS. Kurama's eyes glowed brightly behind his sunglasses as he met the gaze of a shuddering Russell Thrush. Sasuke smirked and lifted his now crackling Amaterasu towards the terrified Dove Bronzewing. Haku had dropped his smile and stared intently at Skylark while Snowfall shifted into its whip form. Now. Naruto directed his attention to Carden and the whiskered blonde punched his fists together to make his stormbreakers unfold around his hands. I believe I told you that we'll fuck you up. And believe me, we will. Kurama grinned as he held his hand out towards them. Russell's eyes became the size of dinner plates and the faunus grin widened. His predator instincts were starting to kick in and he awaited eagerly to be released from his leash. But first, we have to make one thing clear, Sasuke said as the sky started to darken overhead and Dove's arms began to shake as they weakly held his sword up. You will leave John Arc, the rest of Team JNPR, Team RWBY and any faunus on campus alone. Haku cracked Snowfall and took a single step forward, which made Skylark swallow and lift his halberd. Or else what? Carden either bravely or stupidly asked as he held his mace towards Naruto. Naruto's smile widened. Or we'll finish what we started today. The three other members of Team NHKS moved before any member of Team CRDL could process what Naruto had said. They moved at once, their attacks nearly choreographed with how well-timed they were. Haku's face was frighteningly blank while he faced down Sky. With a small crack in the air, Snowfall had suddenly wrapped around Sky's waist before the blue-haired boy could realize that Haku had moved. Haku's eyes flared with rage before he pulled back and flung Sky towards him. Haku turned and let Sky fly past him to crash through a few branches and land on his face in a bush. Another pull jerked the blue-haired teen from the ground and slammed Sky's back into a tree. A third and final pull on Haku's part peeled Sky off of the tree and into a well-prepared punch that knocked him out cold. Haku stared down at the boy with thinly veiled anger in his eyes and twisted his wrist to unwind his weapon from Sky's waist. Nearly frothing at the mouth when he was given the silent go-ahead, Kurama charged at Russell with his hand still outstretched. His hand wrapped around Russell's throat, tightening slightly as he rushed the punk like huntsman in training into a tree backfirst. Russell let out a choked cry of pain as the back of his head slammed into the bark. Kurama grinned at the sound and took in the fear that remained Russell's eyes. So, Kurama was a bit of a sadist, sue him, it was part of who he was. With Rikudo's spear mode, Kurama stabbed the tip into Russell's collar and threw him into the air. Kurama watched with a disturbingly wide smile as he gleefully witnessed Russell land atop Sky's still form with a loud smack. The faunus tail flicked happily as the two teens groaned on the ground. With vindication fueling him, Sasuke rushed forward and locked blades with Dove. Amaterasu's curved blade allowed Sasuke to control the struggle, but Dove was no slouch in swordplay as he held strong, despite the disadvantage. Their eyes met, a dark pair filled with fear and a pair of black orbs darker than the night sky. Sasuke smirked and Dove paled. There was a soft boom of thunder before Dove recalled what Sasuke's semblance could do, as shown in countless fights. Though everyone and their grandmother knew Sasuke abused his semblance, no one had yet to find a way to beat him in a class spar. No one aside from his teammates, that is. With this information in mind, Dove could only scream in agony when he was electrocuted, and all the while Sasuke continued to smirk. The smoking Dove was then dragged over to the other two and piled on top of them. This was watched by the three defeated teens' team leader. Carden tightened his grip on his mace and began to back away. He stopped his retreat and turned around when he was shoved in the back by the other team leader. My team just beat yours in 5 seconds flat. Naruto had an intense gleam in his eye. The gleam became much more prominent as he began a slow approach. Carden retreated a few steps, his body trembling, but never once took his eyes off of the whiskered teen while he spoke. Sky's back is most likely bruised, his ribs possibly cracked and his nose is definitely shattered. Russell's head is probably throbbing and he's probably not faring well from the massive fall he went through. Dove is, well, he's currently experiencing the reason why your parents told you that you're not supposed to put a penny into a live socket. Why you can't get away with this? Carden muttered. His father would know, Carden was not going to fall that low. He was bigger than Naruto. The blonde looked like a swimmer while Carden was a knight. Carden was trained in combat by the finest family teachers and Naruto was a known orphan, a nobody. He tightened his grip on his mace and he lifted it up over his head. A rage filled Carden and he ignored the groaning members of his team. You won't get away with this. Naruto showed no surprise as the other team leader tried to assert himself over him. In fact, he almost looked like he had planned for it, if the small quirk of the lip was anything to go by. Carden saw red and dropped his mace down. Naruto merely let his right hand shoot up and he caught the mace as it fell. Carden grit his teeth and tugged his weapon back, but it did not budge. Naruto's eyes locked with Carden's, before they looked to the mace in the blonde's grasp. Carden's burning rage was doused by a chill of fear that overcame him when Naruto crushed mace in his hand. Frightening, isn't it? But do you want to know what's really scary? Naruto let a small smile cross his face as Carden looked back at him. I'm not even trying. Carden's eyes were wide as saucers at the claim. That mace was arguably made of the strongest metals used when crafting weaponry, but the blonde just crumpled it like it was tissue paper. Even if it was bravado, it took a hell of a lot of strength to do what the whiskered blonde had done. If Naruto could do that to metal, then what could he do to a human's body? The question made all of the blood in Carden's face drain away. Now, like we said before, stop bullying our friends or else we will finish what we started. Naruto warned before he drove his left fist into the taller boy's stomach. A sharp A sharp gasp escaped Carden as he folded over from the blow and released his mace's handle. He stumbled back and fell to his knees, his arms wrapped around his stomach. Air failed to return properly and strangled sounds left Carden's mouth. He faintly heard and blearily saw his ruined mace, his pride and joy, land in front of him. Naruto grabbed Carden by the collar of his chest plate and lifted him up to look him in his dazed eyes. I don't know if you can still hear me or not, but on the off chance you can, know that we're watching you, Carden Winchester. Know that you and your team lost without even a sliver of a chance. Naruto paused for a moment before he leaned in and whispered into Carden's ear. And know that I'll end you if you ever try to hurt my friends again. Naruto pulled away to find that the boy's eyes had fallen shut and that his breathing had evened out. He gave a look of disgust to the unconscious teen before reluctantly hefted him over his shoulder. Naruto knelt and grabbed Carden's mace while Haku, Kurama and Sasuke similarly picked up the other 3 members of Team CRDL and their weapons. With everything all set, Naruto led his teammates back to the rendezvous point, going over their cover story as they did. Whoa, what happened to them? John asked as Team NHKS walked out of the woods with Team CRDL on their shoulders or in their arms. Naruto chuckled sheepishly as he walked forward with Carden's body draped over his shoulder, his teammates not far behind him. We found them fighting off a few Beowulfs, he said. They had decided on making themselves out to be saviors while also making Team CRDL look somewhat respectable. This was only a warning, after all. Real humiliation and shame would come if Team CRDL decided to act out again. Carden's mace got crushed and the others got a bit winded. Poor Russell was pinned against a tree with a claw around his neck before Haku saved him. Being the good guys we are, we carried them back after they passed out. And your jars? Professor Goodwitch asked. She adjusted her glasses and gave a disapproving look to Haku, Sasuke and Kurama while they walked past towards the waiting bulkhead. Naruto rubbed the back of his head with his free hand. They sort of played the part of a needed sacrifice to ensure that we got away. I'll apologize to Professor Peach when we get back. I see. Professor Goodwitch's eyes narrowed slightly. She let out a soft sigh and her gaze relaxed. Very well, set him in the bullhead with his team and we'll have some faculty carry them to the nurse's office when we return. Naruto gave a two-handed salute and followed after his team, who were followed by a reunited John, Nora, Pyrrha and Run. The sight of the happy Team JNPR brought a small smile to Naruto's face. His attention was drawn away from Team JNPR when Yang bumped her arm into his. Wow, Whisker Boy, Carden's got to be at least 300 pounds with all that armor on, and I can't lift that much without my semblance active. Even aura enhancement can't help you that much. Yang gave him an appreciative once-over while her lips pulled up into a small smile. Someone's a lot stronger than they look, huh? This is nothing. Naruto waved off her praise with his free hand while he adjusted Carden on his shoulder. When I was on a field trip back home, my teacher made me carry a captured Ursa back as punishment for running off without supervision. Let me tell you, those things may dissolve into wisps of smoke, but they are not light. I bet that really puts the oomph in your pounding. Yang grinned as she elbowed her fellow blonde. Yang. Seriously. Ruby, who was right in behind them along with the silently smirking Blake and the amused butt-trying and failing at not showing it Weiss, pulled her hood over her head and clapped her hands over her ears. Silver eyes glared up from beneath the edge of the red fabric into laughing lilac. I so don't want to hear that. I was talking about fighting, Ruby, Yang said as Naruto laughed. The buxom blonde grinned back at her little sister. Such a little perv you've become. Geez, what would Dad say? That it was your fault. Ruby shot back with a small flush on her face as she glared at the two blondes. She grumbled to herself while her sister, teammates and Naruto laughed at her outburst. Enough fooling around, everyone on the bullhead. Professor Goodwitch instructed as she strode past them. As Naruto boarded, he locked eyes with her and she gave a very brief nod to him, which made Naruto's smile become a tad bit bigger. Well, it would seem that because of the, Beowulf's attack, Team CRDL needs at least 2 more weeks of rest and Skylark may need more intensive therapy for his back. Professor Ashbin took a sip of coffee as he looked at the 4 teens that stood before him. It seems as though Team CRDL owes you their life, as hard as it was for them to admit it. Just glad we could help some fellow students, Professor O. Naruto grinned widely while Kurama snickered and Sasuke smirked. Haku blinked and furrowed his brow as he tried to figure out what was really said. A second passed before Haku's eyes widened and a smile crossed his face. In the reflection of Ashbin's glasses was where Haku found the answer. Strewn across the headmaster's desk was a mess of papers, with a few of them having backwards written words that were hardly noticeable unless one looked. Together, the words formed a small message. CRDL silenced. Investigation begun. Good job. If that's all, then I believe I can file these injuries off as a Grimm attack and call it a day. Ashbin smiled lightly at the team before him. Good job, boys. I can see you all are destined for great things and very protective. Now, off to bed with you. Tomorrow, the weekend begins, and one should always use that time wisely. You got it, Professor O. Naruto gave a 2-fingered salute before he led his team out of the headmaster's office. Once the door was shut, Ashbin sat back and sighed slightly. He relaxed in his chair for a moment before a smile spread across his face. He certainly is his father's son. The headmaster's words were met with a chuckle. Isn't he? I think he's more like his mother, if I had to be honest. A tall man stepped slightly out of the shadows. The man cupped a hand on his chin and tilted his head back as he looked up. I thought we had taught him better than that. He didn't even bother to check to see if the room was clear before the debriefing began. He is still young and his guard never dropped. Besides, I believe he realized a moment after I started to speak that something was amiss, Ashbin said with a smile. He lost it though, and his hands interlaced in front of him. Have you any new developments, my friend? Something is on the move, the tall man said with a frown on his face. I don't know if it's the Fourth War, Roman Torchwick's mysterious faction, or the White Fang, but something is coming. They need to be ready, Oz. Not just those boys, but all of your students. They are going to be drawn into action and soon. Before you say anything, the time for letting the young act young is coming to a close. We need them to be protectors, hunters, and possibly even soldiers. He dropped a file on the desk and Ashbin barely took a moment to look at the black CRDL scrawled across the vanilla file. Ashbin didn't bother to look at it, as he knew by the cardinal red tag what it contained. He was the one that had offered it to his guest, after all. These boys are not soldiers of Remnant, protectors of people, or even hunters to counter the forces of Grimm. They are hot-headed, arrogant, cowardly, greedy, and selfish little bastards. The man leaned forward, glaring into Ashbin's calm eyes, while he pressed his fists into the desk. How did these bastards get into your school, great and powerful Ashbin? I do not know. Ashbin took a sip of his coffee and set the mug down atop the file. He looked up and met the hard gaze of his guest. But believe me, they will not be here for much longer. It will take time, but we will find a way to legally plunge them from the system. Make sure of that. The man's gaze became piercing. Remnant doesn't need any more falls, torchwicks, or weasels on the loose. That we can agree on. Ashbin nodded firmly. He folded his hands together and glanced up at the other occupant of the room. Any word on their availability? The guest seemed to lose the tension in his shoulders. He backed away and smiled. Oh, KAAG will be more than ready for this mission. Good, Ashbin said with a similar smile on his face. It was nice to see you again, my friend. I'm always up for a visit, Oz. The figure waved before he slipped into the shadows and disappeared. Ashbin sipped his coffee and looked at the file that had been replaced when he wasn't looking. His smile widened as he flipped it open to find a biography along with a picture and he chuckled. My, so many interesting people come out of those academies. Very interesting indeed. Coco, I swear if you don't let me go I'm going to prank you so hard. Naruto gagged as his self-proclaimed sister hugged him tightly. He sent a glare to the rest of his team and the other members of Team CFBY for letting this happen. The older students had stumbled across Team NHKS shortly after they left Ojban's office, and the leader had quickly glommed her younger brother. I'm so proud of you, Coco said for the umpteenth time. Saving the bad bullies from a group of Beowulfs after they tried to blackmail another rookie. Such a good little boy. Oi! I'm not little. Sasuke smirked as he used his scroll to record the duo. I'm so holding this over his head forever. Agreed. Kurama snickered while Velvet giggled next to him. Haku looked at Fox, who watched the interaction with a small smirk on his face. I'm glad you got my message. Naruto was getting a bit fathead. Fox merely waved him off. The older teen was a man of few words. Coco really does care about him, Yatsuhashi said softly as he smiled at the sight of the two siblings. We have a few missions coming up and she's trying to hide it, but she's worried about you all. Professor Ojban has been acting far stranger than usual. His disappearance this morning put our teachers on edge. Haku arched a brow. So only Professor Goodwitch knew? Interesting. Haku. Help me. I'm your partner, damn it. Haku looked at Naruto with a small amused smile. The whiskered leader was caught in a noogie from Coco and struggling to escape while the older girl laughed. Say it. Say you love your sister. Never. Naruto climbed to the roof of the dorm in order to escape Coco's grasp, using an access hatch that he discovered while he was playing a few pranks. As he hid, he kept a close eye on the sullen John when the other blonde walked out onto the balcony and stared off at the horizon. After Naruto learned that the boy had saved Carden from an Ursa that attacked the two in a message from Yang, who was curious about his sudden disappearance, his opinion of his fellow blonde leader rose significantly. Even though Naruto still felt he was the cooler of the two. Naruto smiled as he sat on the ledge, his gaze down at the balcony below. John and Pira's friendship was fixed, and Naruto had to cover his mouth to keep from giving away his position. Deciding that this was a moment he shouldn't be spying on, Naruto rolled back and kicked to his feet. Good call, cute boy. Naruto mused as he walked to the roof access with a smile on his face. He kicked the access panel open and then tilted his head in thought. Guess it's like Kakashi said, the road of life has many twists and turns. 7. Son Goku finds a penny. So, it was nice of you to invite us to come with, but festivals aren't my scene, Kurama said dryly as he and his teammates followed Team RWBY through the city of Vale. He was content to stay at Beacon for their Friday off, but Naruto had, for some reason, immediately accepted the invitation to come alone. He was almost eager to do so when they were asked. Naruto refused to tell his team why that was, and the grin on his face left nothing but the feeling of dread in his team's stomachs. Figures that you would say that, Otsutsuki, Weiss said with a scoff. She gained a small smile as she walked through the streets. This is no ordinary festival, though. This is the Vital Festival. The festival where hunters from all over the four kingdoms gather together to celebrate different cultures through dances, parades, and a tournament. Sounds like a good time, what do you think? Yang asked Naruto, who was far too interested in something on his scroll. She arched a brow when he didn't respond. Whisker boy, I asked you a question, hello? Naruto snickered and rapidly wrote something back with his thumbs. Yang's eye twitched as her normally responsive friend ignored her. She leaned over to get a look at what he was reading, only for Naruto to collapse his scroll before she could make any words out. Sorry, just checking the weather, he said with a smile. What was your question, Yang? I asked you how big you were when you were all hot and bothered, Yang said with a smirk on her face. The other members of Team RWBY gawked and stuttered at her comment while the other three boys gained amused smirks. Yang ignored them and watched Naruto intently. She wanted to catch him off guard in retribution for ignoring her. At about 3/4 of a ruler, give or take, Naruto said nonchalantly like he was discussing the weather. Kurama and Sasuke laughed when all of the members of Team RWBY stopped walking and turned bright red. Haku shook his head and smiled at Yang as she gaped at Naruto's response. I'm fairly certain that Naruto doesn't know the meaning of the word modesty. He sighed slightly. There were many a time over the past few months where Haku stepped out of the shower to find his half-awake blonde friend using the toilet. It wasn't exactly the type of thing one wanted to see after they stepped out of the shower, but as a male, he could understand it. Still, Team NHKS was awaiting the answer to their request for a better lock on their bathroom door. Why yeah, but he could just be trying to cover for himself when it comes to that topic, Yang quickly said to save face, her cheeks cooled unlike her teammates. She glared at Kurama and Sasuke when they smirked at her. We've known the idiot since childhood, Sasuke said as he nodded towards Naruto, who had started to look at his scroll again. And we've roomed together for nearly half a year. Trust us when we say that Naruto's not kidding. Plus, Haku's right. Naruto does not care about modesty. Yeah, I'll take a bowl of chicken ramen, Sasuke. Naruto waved off his teammate as he read through his scroll and snickered again before his thumbs began to blur across the screen. The group of 8 were silent for a moment save for the tapping of Naruto's thumbs and his occasional snickers. Well, yes, but that aside, there was a reason I wanted to come here today. And it was not to discuss Uzumaki's privates. Weiss huffed with red cheeks as she once more started to lead the group down the street. Yang had to grab Naruto by his hood and pull him along since he was buried in his scroll. As they walked, Weiss, Blake and Ruby started to lose the blood that had rushed to their cheeks while Yang had a pensive gleam in her eye. So, what's so special about the Vital, anyway? Sasuke asked, tired of the quiet. That and Naruto's snickering was grating on his nerves. He needed a distraction before he instigated a fight just to end the annoyance. This festival takes a long time to put together, all of the planning has to be perfect and all the coordination between the many people is astounding. Weiss explained with a smile on her face. She intertwined her hands together and sighed happily. To be in charge of such an important event, can you imagine how much work goes into making it a perfect atmosphere for Vale's guests? It's inspiring. I don't think that is supposed to be inspiring, Kurama said as he pointed at a taped-off dust shop with 2 men standing outside it. The window was broken and yellow tape formed an X on the interior. The 2 teams approached the crime scene and Ruby interrupted the arguing officers with a clearing of her throat. What happened here? She asked. Some brat threw a brick through the window, what do you think, kid? The officer taking notes answered rudely. Officer, there's no need for that. We're just concerned citizens, Haku said in Ruby's defense. The pretty one's got a point, the other officer said with a smile. Someone broke in and robbed the place. Strange thing, too. This is the 4th store hit this week, the irate officer said with a grunt. And the lien was still in the register, just like the others. Man, who would need all that dust? The other asked. I don't know, White Fang maybe. You know what I do know? We don't get paid enough for this? Well, that and the chief will have our heads if we don't break one of these robberies before the festival starts. The 2 teams took that as their cue to leave while the 2 officers started to moan and groan about their job. Weiss scowled and crossed her arms. White Fang figures that group of faunus would be behind this. Hey, watch it, Schnee. Kurama warned with a growl. I'm just saying, only that group full of psychopathic criminals would do something so thoughtless and horrible, Weiss said. The White Fang are not a bunch of psychopaths, Blake said with a frown. They're a collection of misguided faunus. They're trying to wipe out all of humanity. Weiss argued with a raised brow. Okay, they're really misguided, Blake said as she crossed her arms. They're not all that bad though, and either way, there's no reason for them to steal a bunch of dust. She's not wrong, Sasuke said. About the White Fang, I mean. A few old members left because of the violent actions that the organization was starting to take. There was a member back in our hometown, he was a nice guy. Really? What happened to him? Weiss asked. Sasuke scowled and Kurama snarled as they looked away. The Fourth War killed him. Naruto answered quietly as he pocketed his scroll and slipped his hands in his pockets while he lowered his head. His name was Hiruzen Sarutobi and he was killed in another Fourth War attack 6 years ago. Oh. The air turned tense as the members of Team RWBY tried to think of something to say while Haku put a hand on his partner's shoulder. Naruto gave his partner a grateful smile before he looked up and beamed. Awesome, we're at the docks. Naruto cheered. Yes it, wait, why is that awesome for you? Weiss asked. The others joined her in staring curiously at the whiskered blonde. I don't know? Naruto offered weakly as he looked around the docks nervously. I mean, His pocket buzzed again and Kurama snagged the scroll before Naruto could stop him. Kurama held the item over his head and smirked as the slightly shorter teen tried to take it back. I wonder what could be on this that you're trying to keep secret? Kurama asked as his thumb lingered over the button. Damn it, Kurama, give it back. That's an invasion of my privacy. Naruto hissed as he tried to grab his scroll. He was stopped from jumping as Yang looped one of her arms through Naruto's to keep him in place while she smirked at Kurama. Read it, Foxy, Yang said. She wanted to know what distracted her friend from her amazing puns and jokes. Oi! Yang! Apparently there's a new message from Son Goku? Kurama arched a brow and looked at his team leader. He's my pen pal. Now give it. Yang pulled Naruto back as he made a leap for his scroll. Oh, no. Now I have to know what it says. Kurama? Way ahead of you, Blondie. Kurama smirked as he opened the message. Good news, Menma. Real original there, Naruto. Screw you, Sasuke. I think we dropped anchor, Kurama said as he continued to read the message despite Sasuke's ribbing. I'm going to crawl out of my hiding spot and sneak onto the docks. Hope to meet up with you soon, little dude. Ah, you got a close friend by the sound of it, Naruto. Shut up, Kurama. Naruto hissed with narrowed eyes. He caught his scroll as it was tossed to him and stuck it in his pocket. Almost brotherly, Sasuke said with a smirk. Does Koko have to worry about some mystery guy stealing her cute little brother away? Naruto looked at him with horror. You wouldn't dare. Sasuke flicked his scroll open and his smirk widened as the team leader paled. Try me. Who's Koko? Ruby asked Haku under her breath. An older student. She's in my history class and part of Velvet's team. Haku explained. She's taken to Naruto and practically adopted him as her little brother. Her teammates like to treat him as such. She's very similar to Yang sometimes. Ruby grinned and pointed at Naruto with a smile on her face. Aha! Now you know my pain when you and Yang gang up on me. Is she hot? Yang's question caught her teammates slightly off guard. She shrugged. What? You know how hard it is to avoid someone without knowing what they look like? She's got a point, Kurama said with a shrug. He made an iffy gesture with his hand. Well, I'm not into you apes, so the most I can say is dash. He was cut off when shouts came from a nearby docked ship. The aide looked over as a distant figure ran across the deck of the ship and leapt to the docks despite the yell. Naruto's eyes went wide and he broke free from Yang's grip with a wide smile on his face as he ran towards the dock, knocking the two policemen to the ground in the process. Sorry. Haku apologized to the two officers as he, Kurama, Sasuke and Team RWBY chased after the blonde. They followed Naruto to the dock, where he stopped and stared at the teen that hung by his tail from a light post. "You no good stowaway!" a man on the ship yelled angrily. "Hey, a no good stowaway would have gotten caught. I'm a great stowaway," the blonde faunus argued as he flipped up and sat on the light post while he peeled and ate a banana. He paused in his second bite as he caught sight of the group and his eyes widened. The stowaway swallowed his bite before he grinned and jumped from the light post to land in front of the beacon students. He had blonde hair just as messy as Naruto's own, despite the fact it was a lighter shade. His skin was similarly tanned and they both shared similar blue eyes, though Naruto's were darker. The faunus was dressed in an open white shirt that revealed his toned physique, red gloves and jeans that were rolled up to his knees while sneakers covered his feet. The faunus' tail swung up happily like a monkey's as he looked Naruto over. "Sun-kissed hair, whiskered cheeks, orange all over, Menma, my bro, is that you?" he asked eagerly. "Monkey tail, red gloves, and a chain on the right side of your pants." "Goku!" Naruto greeted happily as he threw his fist forward. "Menma!" Goku grinned and copied the action. Their knuckles collided and the two burst into even wider grins. "Sun Wukong." Goku introduced himself. "Naruto Uzumaki. I can't believe you actually made it all the way to Vale." Naruto greeted the faunus teen happily as they broke off their fist bump. Sun Wukong slipped his arm over Naruto's shoulders and ran his other hand through his hair. "Hey, man, when you're as slick as me, anything is possible." "Oh there's more than two," Sasuke mumbled. Kurama actively whimpered and Haku sighed. Yang, however, looked between the two blonde boys with a grin on her face. "Sorry, handsome, but that offer for a threesome with me and Whisker Boy has been redacted." She tapped her chin playfully. "Now, how to get them to make me a yawning sandwich? I think I'm going to hurl." Ruby groaned. "I was talking about making me food." "Man, Rubes, your mind has fallen deep into that gutter, hasn't it?" Yang teased. She grinned widely when Ruby glared at her. Weiss and Blake sighed, but both had small smiles on their faces at the sisters' byplay. "I have got to show you the good stuff. The ramen shops, the dust shops, that haven't been robbed anyway, the secret you-know-what stock store," Naruto said as he started to lead the team past the group. "All in good time, man, I'm in no rush. I'm just glad to be here, stoked even. Sun looked over the gathered group and winked at Blake before he returned his attention to Naruto. "But maybe some introductions are in order first." "Eh?" Naruto looked from Sun to his friends and back. A sheepish grin spread across his face while he scratched the back of his head. Right, sorry." He apologized. Naruto turned to the two teams and held a hand out to Sunday. "Guys, this is my pen pal and long-distance friend since I was 10 years old, Sun-goer, Sun Wukong." Sun waved at the group and patted Naruto's shoulder. "Sorry if this was a surprise for you all, but, I'm technically not supposed to be here yet." "Hence why Naruto kept it secret," Haku said with a sigh. He gave his partner a bemused smile. "Still, I'm surprised that you haven't mentioned your pen pal sooner." "Oh, he's been busy with missions with his team, so we haven't been able to talk since, last year?" Naruto asked. Sun nodded. "That sounds about right. Hey you." The group of teens looked back as the cops started to walk towards them. "Oh, the fuzz." Sun looked around nervously. Naruto pushed Sun in front of him and they fled from the officers. He looked over his shoulder at the others. "Split up and cheese it." Team RWBY took his words to heart and split down the other way. Haku stepped into a mirror and vanished. The cops ran past Kurama and Sasuke without acknowledging them. The two partners waited for a moment before they looked at each other. "Wanna go hit up the arcade?" Sasuke asked. Kurama shrugged and slipped his hands into his pockets. Sure, why not? Wow, they really don't ever look up, Sun said in surprise as he and Naruto relaxed on the ledge of a building. They watched the alleyway they had ducked into as the two officers ran right past the fire escape they climbed. Told you so. Naruto grinned and looked up as Haku stepped out of a mirror beside him. Hey, Haku. Haku, Sun Wukong. Sun, this is my assigned partner Haku Yuki. Sun tilted his head before he beamed and pointed at the newcomer on the roof. Ah, yeah. You're the really polite girly boy that can walk through teleporting mirrors. Haku sighed and nodded with a small smile. Well, Naruto explained it almost correctly, so I can't fault you. A pleasure to meet you, Sunday. Man, you really are super polite. Sun blinked with a wry grin on his face. He looked at his fellow blonde. So, how'd you prank him? Let my other teammate who thought he was a girl walk in on him while he was showering. Nice. Haku sighed into his hand as he palmed his face. What have I walked into? Sun hopped to his feet and dusted off his pants. Right then, can we go find the cute girls now? He grinned at Naruto. I want to learn more about the hottie that was ogling us. So, what? You two dating? Nah, Yang and I are just joking around most of the time, Naruto said as he got to his feet and interlaced his hands behind his head. Then she's open season? Sun asked with a grin. Naruto gave Sun a small smile. I guess so. But, old friend or not, if you do hook up with her and hurt her down the line. Naruto reached out and punched a smokestack. A web of cracks spread up the brick before it crumbled into dust. Haku stared at the feat of strength while Sun laughed nervously and his tail ducked between his legs. Message received, man. Message received. You should have seen what he did to a student that was blackmailing our male friend. Haku smiled lightly at the memory. The student's weapon was crushed and he was knocked out in a single punch. He's still in the medical ward of Beacon recovering, I think. Yikes. Sun blinked and looked back at Naruto. You are a scary dude, you know that? That's not including the pranks I've done over the years. Naruto added. A Cheshire grin spread across his face. I've yet to be caught for the real big ones. I repeat, you're a scary dude. This would be a lot easier if Kurama was with us, Naruto said as he peered down from the rooftop of the building he was on. This city is almost too big, they could be anywhere by now. We could try to contact them with our scrolls, Haku said dryly, only to be ignored. He was seated and using his looking glass to see if he could pinpoint either Team RWBY or Kurama and Sasuke under Naruto's instructions. Sun rubbed his chin and then snapped his fingers. Oh, is Kurama the fox-tailed faunus? The dude in the red? Right. Naruto nodded with a grin. He's the one that you pranked with a water gun, a pencil, and rubber duckies, right? Yep. He kicked my ass hard for that one. Heck, I think that's the reason I managed to activate my semblance for the first time. I want to know so badly what you're talking about, but I think for sanity's sake, it's better if I don't ask, Haku said. They're not on Main Street. Sun chuckled as he plopped down next to the feminine boy. You're a lot like my buddy Neptune, you know. The straight man of the group. You implying that you're not straight? Naruto asked out of sheer curiosity. Little dude, life is worth living to the fullest, Sun said with a sagely nod. We only got one shot to do with it what we will, so why not go for what we want? Girls, guys, human or faunus? I don't care, Sun just wants to bring the fun. Wise words, my friend. Naruto nodded. You only live once. YOLO. YOLO? Sun rubbed his chin again and his lips spread into another smile. YOLO, I like that. It's got a nice ring to it. Yeah, But if it becomes a phrase, people will use it as an excuse to do stupid things, Naruto said as he sat down beside his pen pal. Isn't that the purpose of it though? Sun asked him. Naruto shook his head. No. I agree that you should live life to the fullest, but you should not risk your life trying to perform stupid acts. YOLO should be, like, a suggestion. You mean like a school's rules? Exactly. Haku sighed. I fear for the future if either of you become teachers or procreate. Man, Sasuke and Kurama made you so mean, Naruto said with a pout while Sun laughed at the look on his face. Found them. Haku's eyes blinked a few times before he stood up and pointed to the north. Team RWBY is 4 blocks that way on Monty Avenue. Cool, then let's go. I'm getting sick of sitting around. It's making me all philosophical and stuff, Sun said and shuddered at the thought. He rubbed his chin. But how to make this interesting? You two up for a race? Sure. Ready, set, go. Naruto jumped across the street and landed on the other building's roof. He turned and grinned at Sun and Haku while he flashed them the victory sign. Hey! You little rat, that's cheating. Sun scowled before he followed after the shorter blonde. Haku watched the Faunus and his partner start to race across the rooftops and rubbed his forehead with his hand. How did I not see that coming? With a sigh, Haku made a mirror behind himself and stepped into it. He might as well throw both off guard by beating them in the race. They never set any ground rules, so Haku would abuse it and hold the victory over his team leader's head. Forever. Not cool, man. Not cool. Sun sulked beside Naruto, both of them curled up on the roof of the building and drawing circles with their fingers. Haku's so mean, cheating like that. Naruto agreed with a sniffle. Haku rolled his eyes. Grow up, Naruto. Neither of you set ground rules, so why wouldn't I abuse my semblance? Cheater. The 2 blondes accused sourly. I prefer to see it as thinking outside the box, Haku said. He looked down and arched a brow. It seems that Ruby has made a new friend. New friend? Naruto asked as he perked up. Is she cute? Sun asked at the same time. Haku hummed. Can't really tell from this far up. Then let's go say hello. Naruto exclaimed before he hopped over the edge of the roof. Look out below. He really is the twin brother I never had, Sun said with a chuckle before he did a swan dive. Banzai. Haku's eye twitched and pinched the bridge of his nose. One week he decides to be super smart and tactical, and the next it's like he's a kid on a sugar rush. Fog Academy never prepared you for this kind of teammate. It has to be something in the ramen. It just has to be. He stepped back into a mirror and walked out to stand next to Weiss, who jumped when she realized he was there. Ah. Geez, Haku, you need to say something when you do that. Weiss glared at the androgynous boy. Sorry, Weiss. Haku smiled at the girl. He then looked up as Naruto landed beside him and Sun flipping at the last second to land safely. What took you two so long? Dude, so not funny. Sun mumbled as he crossed his arms and pouted at the smiling feminine boy. Naruto shook his head before he looked at the other new addition to the small group. She was a girl about Ruby's height, but had a few inches on his fellow team leader. Her hair was curly in chin length, and, most importantly, an awesome shade of orange. Her eyes were green and freckles were dusted across her nose and cheeks. In her awesome orange hair was a pink bow and around her neck was an oddly futuristic-looking black and neon green collar. It was odd because he clashed with the old-fashioned beige clothes that the girl wore. Then again, the collar matched her stockings, so maybe it was fine. Naruto wasn't really into fashion, he liked wearing orange, which was noted to be a fashion no-no. So, Ruby, who's the new girl? Naruto asked while he let his hands interlace behind his head. Someone Weiss ran into, Ruby said. She ignored the outraged cry that her partner made. Naruto, this is, Penny. Naruto grinned at the girl. Nice to meet ya. Salutations. Penny greeted back with a smile on her face. Haku stared at the girl before he leaned over to Sunday. Do you notice anything off about her? Yeah, I know. Sun nodded in agreement. That collar looks way out of place. She needs some bling or something, and to show a bit of skin like the Schnee girl or Blondie, there. Haku clapped his hand to his face while Weiss flushed bright red and glared at the faunus. Yang grinned at her fellow blonde and put a hand on her hip while she flipped her hair. Well, you know, if you got it, you gotta flaunt it. She said. Sun laughed and gestured to his lack of shirt. I totally agree. If we're gonna die on a job, might as well do so looking amazing. Or with a smile on your face, Naruto said with a nod. There are 3 of them. Ruby mumbled with horror. She swallowed and rubbed her arms. Dad's not going to believe this. Gotta enjoy what you do. Yan agreed before she frowned at her whiskered friend. So where did you run off to? Sun arched a brow and looked at his laid-back companion. I thought you two weren't dating? We're not, Naruto said as he gave an faunus boy a confused look. Didn't I already explain that? Yeah, but she totally just used the you're in trouble and you're not getting any until I say so voice, Sun said. Naruto stared at him for a moment, which made Sun furrow his brow. You've had a girlfriend before, right? Naruto crossed his arms. Yeah. Not according to Sasuke and Kurama, you haven't. Haku drawled. Yang snickered and Blake pinched the bridge of her nose. You're not allowed to talk, cheater. Naruto glared at his partner, who rolled his eyes in response. Sun munched on an apple he pulled from somewhere. And you have had sex, right? Where did you get that apple? Weiss asked, but scowled when she was ignored. Dude, Naruto said, mock offended. I told you about that time I took that fine woman working at the Kan ramen shop. Sun rubbed his chin and took a bite from his apple. He slowly started to nod his head. Right, that girl without the gag reflex. Not listening, Ruby declared as she pulled her hood over her head and covered her ears. Yang arched a brow at Naruto. No gag reflex? She asked. The whiskered blonde winked back at her, before he looked back at his faunus friend. Exactly. Thanks for those tips, by the way, Naruto said with a nod. Sun tossed his finished apple over his shoulder and smirked. Little dude, it's what I'm here for. To spread my message of fun and free living across the world. No, but seriously, where did you get that apple? Weiss asked again with a scowl. Stole it. So, you've had a girlfriend. Debatable. Haku, shut up. Naruto glared at his partner. You stole it. Weiss glared at the blonde faunus. Sun arched a brow. Yeah, so what? Weiss felt her eye twitch. You no good rapscallion, I should turn you in to the authorities. Perhaps you have some information about the White Fang. Wow, so quick to jump on that boat, aren't you? Sun asked, smiling in amusement. And you snuck onto a ship. More evidence of your criminal connections. Weiss scowled at the faunus boy. I'm going to take you into the police to see how far your connections go. I'm certain with enough digging we'll discover something on the evil White Fang dash. For the last time, the White Fang aren't evil. Blake snapped at the Schneearis. They are crazy, though. Sun crossed his arms and nodded sagely. He arched a brow when Blake glared at him. What did I say? Anyway. Yes, I have had a girlfriend. Naruto repeated so that he could get back on topic. Sun nodded and looked back at his younger friend. You've had a girlfriend and you've had sex, but have you had sex with a girlfriend? Your silence speaks volumes. Fuck you, Haku. I'd pay to see it. Young hooted and nudged Blake. Am I right? Blake glared at her. I am not in the mood. Got it. I don't understand, why would you pay to see him fuck him? Penny asked with a confused smile as she pointed from Naruto to Haku. The group, save for Ruby who was still in her own little world thanks to her hands over her ears and her humming, looked at her. Is it because you are sexually aroused by homosexual intercourse between two attractive males? Why would that arouse you? Right. Sun turned back to Naruto. That was not a question he wanted to touch on, considering the odd way the girl had phrased it. That tone Blondie there used is usually reserved for a sexually active partner. Naruto blinked, looked to Yang, who winked at him, and then looked back at Sunday. So, what does that mean? Haku dropped his face into his hand and let out a groan. He can construct a sadistic and well-prepared intimidation ambush, psychologically analyze people with a glacé, but can't see when he and Yang have chemistry? My partner is so strange. Nope, I've interfered far too much already. Sun crossed his arms and began to walk away. He stopped and turned back with a grin on his face. I'm gonna go check out some of the food around town and see if I can't find a place to stay. Meet up tomorrow? Sure. Naruto nodded with a grin on his face. I can show you that place for the things that shan't be named. Sun grinned and gave Naruto a thumbs up. He then jumped up to the top of a nearby building and ran off, Naruto and Penny waving him off. Farewell, new acquaintance. I cannot wait until we face one another in the tournament. Penny smiled as she waved. Weiss, Blake, Yang, Haku and Naruto turned to face Penny. It was Weiss who broke the ice. You're participating in the Vital Festival tournament? Penny turned to her and beamed. Yes. I'm combat ready. She's adorable. Naruto beamed as he looked at the girl. Indeed. Coco would love her. Naruto glowered at his partner. Why must you bring her up? Because she's the only one that can keep you in check aside from this Kakashi fellow I keep hearing about in passing? Haku returned dryly. PSH, Kakashi wishes he could keep me in check. Naruto scoffed as he crossed his arms. Wait, that degenerate is participating as well? How do you know that? Weiss asked Penny with narrowed eyes. Penny smiled at her. I have read and memorized the list of participants from all schools in the tournament 8,327 times. Sun Wukong is a talented fighter from Mistral. Naruto finished with a grin. He, unlike the others, was not fazed by Penny's odd reading habits. So, I can assume you've been watching his videos? Penny turned to him and nodded. I've been analyzing his fighting style, yes. Videos? Yang asked with an arched brow. Quick little informational videos on impromptu fighting. Naruto shrugged. Mostly him beating the tar out of his classmates. I may have to look at some of these videos. Yang mused. Watch those abs move, how did he get those, anyway? He's got a special intense workout he's developed since he was young. Naruto nodded as he lifted his shirt to reveal his defined abdominals, which were similar to Sun's. I've been using Sun's workout since I was 14. It's made me very flexible. Yang grinned at him. Really now? Oh, like you wouldn't believe, Yang. Naruto grinned back. Flirt later. Weiss cut between the two blondes and she grabbed Penny's shoulders. Does he have any connections to the White Fang? Blake snapped her eyes open and glared at Weiss. Why are you so insistent on making him out to be a bad guy? Because he stole some apples? Snuck onto a ship and who knows what else? Weiss countered as she turned and looked at the raven-haired girl. Face the facts, Blake. That Faunus is a criminal. Oi! That's my friend, you're talking about Sneeze, Naruto said with a frown. And that makes you an accomplice. Weiss argued. So? Naruto countered with an arched brow. He crossed his arms. Son's a good guy. He's my friend. So he steals apples and sneaks on boats, so what? I've done similar stuff. That's not a good thing. Weiss glared at him. She released Penny and turned to fully face Naruto. You should be ashamed of yourself, abusing your training in such a manner. Ruby, hearing her partner's angry voice, dropped her hands from her ears and looked around. What did I miss? Ruby asked her sister. Yang, without removing her eyes from the arguing trio, shushed her. This is getting good, just watch. I'll fill you in later. Am I? Naruto asked with an arched brow. Huntsmen and huntresses are occasionally required to do unsavory things to stop criminals, Weiss. Sun may steal, but that doesn't make him just as bad as the members of the White Fang. The White Fang aren't bad, Blake said with a scowl as she frowned at Naruto. They're not good either. Naruto argued. He frowned at the girl he secretly knew to be a Faunus. Their actions make them no better than the Fourth War. They want to get equality through fear, but that's not equality, that's just turning the tables. They become what they hate and they don't even realize it. Blake frowned at him. They're misguided, not evil. I never said they were evil. I said that Sun was not as bad as the members of the White Fang, who plan attacks that will result in loss of life. Sun's called them crazy, and I don't believe that's right either. Naruto continued. The members of the White Fang are angry and filled with bloodlust, whether it's right or not is up for debate. Not all of them are like that. Some just want equality for Faunus, even if they have to act drastically. Why are you so adamant about defending them? Weiss asked with a frown. Why are you so intent on making them out to be evil? Blake shot back. Penny tilted her head. Are they friends? Yes, Ruby said. She grimaced as the two girls glared at one another. I think. If they are friends, why are they arguing? Penny asked. I thought that friends were honest and trusted each other. I would wish for my friends to agree with me, I would not want to argue with them. Friends argue all the time. Haku interjected. He smiled at Penny when she looked at him. To have a different opinion is to be sentient, and one truth that most, if not all, agree on is that freedom is the right to all sentient beings. However, this subject is far more complicated for them. Naruto added. He gestured to Weiss as the two girls resumed their increasingly loud argument. Weiss' family has not had good relations or interactions with any members of the White Fang, hence her heavy bias. Blake is a strong supporter of Faunus rights and wants to see a world where humans and Faunus are equal. She also has given the White Fang the benefit of the doubt and hopes they will return to their old ways. How do you know that? Yang asked. Naruto shrugged. We've had some nice conversations when working on projects for Professor Oobleck. Not going to lie, aside from Professor O, he's my favorite teach. Isn't he, like, hopped up on coffee 24/7? Ruby asked. Exactly. It's funny. Naruto beamed. Penny had an inquisitive frown on her face. So, they argue over different opinions, but they are still friends? Yes, Haku said. Weiss and Blake have strong personalities that would keep them apart from each other initially if not for their team placement. However, time and interaction has made them close. This one argument will not separate them. Maybe we were sick of being pushed around. I think. Haku blinked in surprise at Blake's outburst. Naruto rolled his eyes and interlaced his hands behind his head. They'll be fine. Wow, I didn't know Blake had a speed semblance like you, Ruby. She's. Weiss stuttered as she stared in shock at the bow in her hand. She was a faunus? Yang and Ruby were also surprised by this, apparently, since their words were soft and their eyes were wide. Penny tilted her head. You weren't aware? To be fair, humans aren't that smart, Naruto said with a smile. People see what they want to see. Heck, I wouldn't have known Belle was a faunus if Kurama hadn't told me when we first met her. You knew? The three girls on Team RWBY that were still present snapped their gaze to Naruto. Haku tilted his head. I figured it out after she had tuna sandwiches 3 days in a row. And Kurama confirmed it when you asked. That, too. Why didn't you tell us? Weiss demanded as she stormed over to the leader of Team NHKS. Naruto arched a brow. Why didn't you tell Ruby that you're the one who ate the last of her chocolate chip cookies and not Young? That was you. I told you I didn't do it. The two sisters shouted, one in anger and the other in triumph. Weiss glared daggers at Naruto. You read my D-journal? Yes, I read your diary. Naruto nodded proudly. He grinned at her. I'm flattered you think my whisker marks are cute, by the way. He shrugged and ignored the frosty glare that Weiss gave him. But, the reason I and anyone on my team didn't tell you was simply because it wasn't my call. Belle hadn't decided to trust you with that secret yet, and with how you interact with Kurama, could you blame her? Weiss pursed her lips, but continued to glare at Naruto. She huffed and stormed off, a mildly miffed Ruby behind her. Yang's smile fell slightly and she crossed her arms under her bust. I can't believe she didn't tell us. We all have our secrets to keep, Yang. Haku mused. Yang nodded sadly and walked off after her other two teammates, giving Naruto and Haku a half-hearted goodbye wave. Haku blinked and looked around curiously as he realized something was off. Where did Penny go? She ran off after Belle when I started to talk about Sneeze's diary, Naruto said nonchalantly, his hands behind his head as he looked up to the corner of a building and gave a small smirk as a golden tail ducked over the edge. He turned and started to walk towards Main Street. Come on, Haku, we need to go find Kurama and Sasuke. Did you intentionally let Penny slip away when you made up that story about reading Weiss' diary? Haku asked as he followed his teammate. Story? Please, Haku, I've read all the girls' diaries. Did you know Nora is actually allergic to dogs? Naruto, why did you read their diaries? Meh, for the hell of it. Kurama wanted dirt, didn't he? Haku drawled. Their faunus friend was a huge gossip and loved to broker information. He truly took to the fox heritage of a cruel trickster well. Those are your words, not mine. Now, come on, let's go find the two jackasses. Knowing them, they're probably at an arcade or something. 8. Roman's Fangs. A few days had passed since Blake had gone missing. The first day no progress was made in finding her because Ruby, Yang and Weiss were still shocked at the revelation of their teammate being a secret faunus and ex-White Fang member. And the second day was due to the lack of progress made on the first. Team JNPR offered to help with the search, but Weiss had refused them before Ruby could accept, and when Naruto, Sasuke, Kurama or Haku tried to offer their help, they were met with possibly the coldest shoulder ever. The Shin'aris had all but ignored Team NHKS since they had known Blake's secret, but had not told any of them. She felt it was a betrayal of sorts, even when Haku pointed out that the secret was Blake's to tell and not theirs. Weiss stubbornly refused to accept that as an answer and had all but began to pretend the all-male team even existed. Her guard was high after Blake's secret of once being a member of the White Fang. It seemed that she hadn't taken the violation of her trust very well, which was something that Sasuke said he could understand. The other two members of Team RWBY hadn't spoken with the all-male team much either, save for at the lunch hall. Ruby's excuse was a bit understandable, since the youngest huntress in training was more concerned with locating her wayward teammate. She had apologized for it and Naruto took it for what it was. He understood what the problem was for Ruby. Her pride and confidence as a leader had taken a hard blow. Not only was she a good 2 years behind everyone in her class intellectually, but she was also lacking 2 years of experience and emotional maturity. Yang was also a bit miffed at the boys for the secret, but she was being distant for some other reason. When asked by Sasuke, Kurama or Haku, Yang refused to give a straight answer. When Naruto asked, she would remain silent and ignore him. However, when they were in the same room, Naruto felt an angry gaze fall upon him. Seeing as he couldn't get an answer through Yang directly or through his teammates' attempts, Naruto just gave up on it and settled with taking the odd angry looks his fellow blonde sent his way. There must be something we can do to help them, Haku said thoughtfully from where he was perched on the edge of a tall building. He and the rest of Team NHKS watched the three girls wander through Vale looking for the now-known cat Faunus. Team NHKS had been following the three girls from a distance under Naruto's orders. The whiskered blonde had a secretive smile when asked why and merely replied that he was bored. Besides, Weiss didn't want help, so pushing on the issue wouldn't be wise at all. I can sense her so I know she's alive, but this is a problem for Team RWBY to address. Kurama sat cross-legged to Haku's left, his cheek propped up by a board fist. The Faunus adjusted his grip on Rikudo's monk staff form. Shni would rip our heads off if we tried to go help without permission. Others cannot fix a broken team. Sasuke mused from where he stood next to the red-themed Faunus. His arms were crossed over his chest and his eyes stared down at the three girls. It is something that must be done by the team itself. The most we can do is guide them down the right path. Haku sighed at the profound answer. Sometimes I wish I had gone to Khan Academy. The team preparation there must have been amazing. He looked to his left in surprise when the lounging form of his team leader burst into laughter. A chuckle escaped Sasuke and Kurama concealed his laughter as best he could while his shoulders shook. Looking between his three teammates, Haku blinked. Am I mistaken? He asked. Yeah, it. You had to be there. Sasuke smiled lightly as their amusement dwindled away. If anything, it was Kakashi who taught us the right way to work as a team. Best teacher ever. Naruto grinned up at the sky and Kurama nodded. Those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their friends are worse than trash. The three Khan natives grinned as they recited one of their teacher's most well-known and recited quotes. By that logic, wouldn't that make Blake worse than trash? Haku asked. It was a beautiful line, really it was, but the philosophy didn't seem to fit the scenario. She has not abandoned her team. Kurama explained as he sat up lightly. She's afraid, and most Faunus react to fear instinctually. Prejudice among her friends isn't a foe she can fight, so she fell upon fear. She ran, and being the good friends they are, Ruby, Yang and, I can't believe I'm saying this, even Weiss is chasing her. They're reacting the same way we would if you decided to up and disappear on us, Sasuke said with a small smirk to Haku. You can thank Kakashi for that if you meet him. Like I said, Kakashi's the best teacher ever. Naruto reiterated. I thought that was the Toad Sage? Haku asked. Naruto shook his head with a smile plastered on his face. No, he's my godfather. He just happened to train me on the side. In what? Haku asked. The whiskered blonde's smile dwindled slightly. Stuff. You three are the most secretive friends I've ever had, Haku said with a sigh while Kurama and Sasuke smirked at his response. He had little to go by on their history, and it felt like he was still putting the puzzle together one misshapen piece at a time. When Haku thought he had the whole picture, they went and threw a new piece into the mix. Not like you've been that open with your past, Sasuke said knowingly. Haku's shoulders fell. My past is where I would like to keep it, in the past. He muttered. Haku looked up when Naruto's hand fell on his shoulder and the whiskered teen smiled at him. And we respect your decision. There will be a time when you wish to tell us, and we will be more than willing to listen. Naruto reaffirmed his words with a comforting pat and Haku smiled at his partner. You're a good friend, Naruto. Naruto beamed at the compliment, but it fell into a pout when Haku sighed. It's a shame you're such an idiot. Oi! Naruto pulled his hand away and glared at his partner. Indeed, it is, Kurama said. He gave a sad sigh of his own despite the giant grin on his face. In the field, he's either battle crazy or tactically unstoppable, but take him out of the field and his brain power drains to zero, leaving him stupid. Naruto's eye twitched. I'm not stupid. Even Koko can't stop that from happening. Sasuke gave a wistful sigh and placed his hand on his cheek. Try as she might. Poor boy will never get himself a girlfriend at this rate. I've had a girlfriend, damn it. It's so sad. All talk and no walk. Kurama shook his head. Naruto blared at his teammates. You're ignoring me on purpose. Haku looked at Sasuke with a small smile. If only I had been partnered with you, Sasuke. Then I would not be forced to listen to him prattle on about various flavors of ramen. We feel your pain. Kurama sympathized with a pat on the shoulder. Sasuke shook his head. It's gotta be all that salt that makes him so stupid. Oh, that tears it. Alm's blessed ramen is not to be insulted in my presence. Naruto started to storm away while the three laughed. The blonde grumbled furiously under his breath as he jumped down into a nearby alleyway. Kurama wiped a small tear from underneath his sunglasses once their team leader was gone. That was fun. He sighed happily. So, since the glutton isn't here, does anyone want to go get a bowl? My treat. I'm in, Sasuke said. He rubbed his stomach. We've been following the girls since breakfast. I'm starved. I suppose a bowl wouldn't hurt. Haku shrugged. The three left the remnants of RWBY to their search as they sought out their lunch. Okay, so, while we agreed to go look at the place where the White Fang aren't supposed to be to prove they're doing things they aren't supposed to do in a different place they're not supposed to be, ugh, my head hurts. Sun groaned after he finished that mouthful. He held his stomach. Or that's just the tea I drank earlier settling. Anyway, I know we're supposed to be like, super sexy faunus duo, but dash. We're not a super sexy faunus duo. Blake cut in calmly as they walked through the city towards the warehouse district. She had poured her heart out to Sun after he had stalked her for a day and a half. Even after he'd learned about her past and involvement with the crazy faunus, he'd agreed to help her try to clear their name. Frankly, she thought he was a sweet guy. A bit eccentric, but concerning who her teammates and friends were, she could accept it. And he had nice ABS. But that was just a bonus. Really? Sun pouted at her before he sighed. Right, okay. He conceded. Anyway, I may have, sort of, told Naruto what we were planning. Blake stopped walking and glared at the blonde faunus. You what? I told Naruto our plan? Sun rubbed the back of his neck. Blake glared at him even harder and he held his hands up in defense. Now hear me out. The little dude's known you were with me the whole time. He's got this brain thing that rears its ugly head every now and again. Plus, he's a beast on a battlefield if his messages to me about his semblance are right. Blake had to concede to that point. Naruto did manage to hold off that massive Grimm bull on his own during their initiation, and had been undefeated in every mock fight that he participated in among the first-year Beacon students. That alone had to mean something. Then there was his stance on the White Fang, which fell alongside with Blake's own. Naruto didn't hold the white fang in contempt like Weiss did, though looking back on it, Weiss' anger was understandable. He thought they needed to be redirected even if that meant using force. Not to mention he's a great dude, and I've been dying to hang out with him. Sun added. He grinned widely and held his arms out. What better way to bond with a bro than by investigating a warehouse district? Fine. Blake agreed after a moment of thought. Naruto was Sun's friend long before either had met Blake, and they'd barely managed to hang out or talk since they met on the docks. It was only natural that Sun would want to meet up with his pen pal over hanging out with her. Blake ignored the mild discomfort in her stomach as that logical reasoning went through her head. Really? Awesome. Sun cheered with his fists in the air. He grinned at his fellow faunus. Trust me, Blake, this'll be a good thing. I sure hope so. Blake mumbled. She turned to continue walking and jumped when Naruto suddenly popped up in front of her. Yo! The whiskered blonde greeted the two faunus with a two-fingered salute. Blake looked at him, then at an equally surprised, but intrigued Sun, and then back at with a frown. How did you sneak up on us like that? She asked. Naruto fell into an exaggerated martial arts stance. I am a ninja. Fear my ninjitude. The whiskered blonde declared, a mad grin on his face. I'm going to regret agreeing to this. Blake mumbled as she walked past the blonde human. Sun snickered while Naruto pouted. The monkey-tailed faunus looked at his fellow blonde with an arched brow and an amused smile. Ninjitude? You're just jealous you didn't come up with it first. Naruto argued with a huff as he followed after Blake. Only a little, Sun said with a chuckle. He let his hands rest behind his head and his tail swished happily as he followed the two Beacon students. One was his longtime pen pal and the other was a cute faunus girl. Life was good for Sun Wukong. Ugh, I'm so bored. I should have gone with Sun to get some food. Naruto groaned as he hung by the back of his knees from the neck of a crane while Sun and Blake staked out the shipyard from atop a nearby warehouse. They'd been at the shipyard for nearly 6 hours now, and aside from the usual boring, to Naruto and Sun anyway, things that occurred on site, nothing much including criminal acts had happened. Heck, Naruto had even enough time to scale this 80-foot-tall shipping crane after Sun had scampered off to get some food. Naruto perked up at the sound of a bullhead engine and looked to his left. Sure enough, there was a bullhead with the symbol of the white fang on the cargo doors. Naruto swung up to stand on the crane's neck and looked over apologetically towards Blake and Sunday. From what he could see, Blake was not pleased with this development, and Sun, well, he looked ready to jump down and put a stop to the operation. 5 white fang grunts, dressed in black and white armor with creatures of Grimm masks on their faces underneath their helmets, stepped out of the bullhead after it landed. They looked around and searched for any threats, and just before Naruto was spotted by one, the end of a cigar flew out from the bullhead's doorway and hit the disguised faunus in the side of the head. Stop wasting time, you animals. We have a very strict schedule to keep. A man stepped out of the bullhead with orange hair combed over the right side of his face and a bowler cap on his head. He wore a white coat and dark pants, but it was the cane that really sealed the deal. That's that Torchwick guy that's been all over the news. Naruto mused silently as his eyes narrowed. He blinked in surprise when Blake jumped down and rushed at the wanted fugitive. Naruto locked eyes with Sun, who shrugged at the questioning glance sent his way. The two blondes looked back up as more bullheads flew into the area. Oh, this will be fun. Naruto grinned as he stood and faced the incoming forces. He clenched his hands into fists and slammed them together. The bulky forms of his gauntlets folded out over his hands and Naruto grinned. With his stormbreakers ready, Naruto brought his arms to his sides and his skin gained a light golden glow as his semblance drew upon more aura. 5 times boost should be enough. Time to crack some skulls. Naruto ran across the neck of the crane at the nearest bullhead when its guns took aim down at Blake, who was in the process of fighting against Torchwick while Sun fought off the thief's goons. Once he reached the end of the crane's neck, Naruto jumped and pulled his right fist back. His grin was wide as he threw his punch and drove his fist into the hull of the nearest bullhead. His blow caved the metal in, a loud ear-shattering squeal filled the air as the metal protested against his strike. Naruto's attack knocked the bullhead into another, causing the two to collide and descend to the shipyard. Naruto landed on a container below and watched as the two bullheads crashed to the shipyard's ground in a fiery explosion. Naruto giggled gleefully while he watched the fires burn. Explosions are so cool. Boom boom. He let his gauntlets fold away with a grin on his face. Get him. Naruto looked over his shoulder at the cry. Several white-fanged grunts aimed their automatic weapons at him. Each nameless opponent had the same determined scowl on their face. Naruto held his hands up to shield his face when they started to open fire. The bullets tore through his clothes like a knife through butter, but bounced off of his skin like it was a wall. He would have laughed if it wasn't so annoying to be pelted over and over by the small ammunition. It was like being attacked by a swarm of mosquitoes. By the time the grunts had run out of rounds in their clips, Naruto's jacket was ruined. The armor was either fractured beyond repair or chock full of bullets, and the cloth was torn beyond the abilities of any tailor. He was pretty much wearing orange and black rags from the waist up. The bullets themselves looked like they had been fired at a wall of adamantium, caved inwards to the point that they looked like they were crafted incorrectly, and were piled around his feet nearly to his ankles. You guys are so lucky that I have 4 more of these jackets. Naruto glowered at the 4 awestruck white fan grunts. He dropped down from his place atop the container and landed in front of the grunts, a perturbed look on his face. He reached up and removed his necklace, carefully bundling it up before he placed the rings in a special slot on the heel of his boot. With his parents' rings safe from danger, Naruto then stood up and cracked his knuckles. So, he said as his eyes looked over his 4 opponents. Who wants to take the next shot? The 4 exchanged looks before the one on the far left, furthest from Naruto, lifted his gun. A bullet left the barrel and nailed Naruto right in the forehead. Naruto's head tilted back slightly before he reached up and grabbed the bullet off of his forehead. Like the last attempts, this bullet was no longer of use to anyone. Naruto flicked it to the side and fixed his gaze on the one that shot at him. Look at that, he said, a grin plastered on his face while he stared at the awestruck grunt. We have a volunteer. Naruto quickly closed the distance between himself and the white fan grunt that tried to shoot him in the head. He knocked the poor sod into the air with a single blow. The whiskered huntsman's hands lashed out and grabbed onto the grunt's ankle. He then turned and flung the winded faunus at one of his companions. This sent the 2 extremists into the side of the container that Naruto previously stood on, and they slumped down to the ground unconscious. The other 2 faunus exchanged a look with each other. They grabbed the underside of their guns and pulled back on the grip. Naruto arched a brow when the duo of extremists were now armed with 5-feet-long broadswords that had the symbol of the white fan carved into the side. They let out yells as they charged at Naruto with their swords over their heads. Naruto caught their attacks on the descent, and he grinned when the 2 saw that the sharp edges of their blades did nothing to his palm's flesh. In hindsight, you probably should have thought this through, Naruto said to the 2 white fan members. He twisted his wrists and snapped the blades with ease. Naruto then grabbed a wrist of either faunus. He twisted under his arms so that they collided with each other, their hands still in his grip. He then leapt up and over the 2 awkwardly hugging faunus. When his feet touched the ground, his arms whipped the white fan grunts at the rising grunts that either Sun or Blake had dealt with. The grunts collided with wet thuds and went limp. The thought of his 2 faunus friends had Naruto turning around to locate them. Once he did, he watched them tag off with one another against Torchwick, doing an impressive job complementing and covering each other. He blinked when a black shade appeared in a place where Blake once was and took a blow that was meant for her. It was similar to Blake in build and appearance, but more inky, like a dark shadow. Whoa, cool semblance. Naruto grinned when he saw that Torchwick visibly became frustrated at his inability to tell which black figure was the real one to strike. This forced the thief to remain on defense lest Blake's furious attack strategy got through. Shadow clones, wish I had that ability. So many pranks could be done. Naruto wistfully dreamt of the ability to make a clone of himself. Heck, why just make one when he could have a dozen? Or 100? Maybe even 1,000? Or 2? Those thoughts led to less than appropriate ones concerning acts of reproduction. A dopey grin quickly spread across Naruto's face. Elsewhere, a tall white-haired man got busted for peeping in a women's locker room when he started to boisterously cry tears of joy. While he suffered the blows empowered by the wrath of righteous feminine fury, he could only smile proudly. When he was finally kicked out of the gym, the man limped over to the nearest park bench, sat down and grinned up at the sky. I'm so proud of you, Naruto. Truly, only a lecherous dream could have made me feel such pride. The man giggled pervertedly and pulled out a notebook. He wrote in it eagerly as the pride he felt inspired a new scene. He would then be arrested for his public debauchery. The officers that arrested him were unnerved by his smile and his penchant for the occasional giggle. They were outright floored when the district attorney demanded he be released and all charges be dropped a few hours later. The district attorney would receive a limited edition of Ninjas of Love in the mail 3 weeks later, signed by the author, the Toad Sage. Naruto shook his head to snap out of the pleasant daydream his godfather would applaud him for. There was time for that sort of thinking later. There was fight to be won now. His head clear, Naruto looked back at the fight between Torchwick, Blake, and Sunday. The two Faunus had the master thief on the ropes, and it looked like Torchwick was aware of it. Torchwick backed away to create distance between himself and the teens. His cane rose up and the end popped open. Naruto frowned and followed Torchwick's aim. His eyes went wide when he saw the shipping container that dangled above Blake and Sun's heads. One good shot was all it would take to snap the cable that kept the container suspended in the air, and it looked like Torchwick was counting on that to be the case. With this in mind, Naruto ran forward towards his friends when he realized the criminal's intention. As he neared his two Faunus allies, a few white fan grunts rose in front of him. Naruto, thinking on the fly of how to quickly deal with these peons without losing his momentum, clapped his hands together at his side. He let his arm swing out and put the 3 white fan grunts down for the night with a 3-in-a-row clothesline. He used the momentum of his arm's swing to spin down, allowing him to slide on his knees to kneel between Blake and Sun. Dodge this, freaks. Torchwick growled as he fired a bright red blast from his cane to take out the cable. The two Faunus dove out of the way of the falling container while Naruto stayed put and rose to his feet. He brought his arms up and managed to catch the oversized metal box before it crushed him. The whiskered blonde grinned at the shocked criminal, whose awe was shared by Naruto's two friends. Hey Torchwick! Naruto called while he slightly adjusted his grip on the container. No way! The thief gaped at the sight of the glowing teenager holding the massive amount of steel over his head with ease. He swore that this sort of thing only happened in movies or books. Huntsmen and huntresses, school kids especially. We're not supposed to be this freaking weird. I think you dropped something. Naruto reared his arms back and then tossed the shipping container with a yell. Here! Shit! Torchwick exclaimed as he dove out of the way. The container loudly crashed into the ground where Torchwick once stood and broke the cement beneath it on the impact. Torchwick rolled out of his dive and used his cane to block a follow-up attack from one of Sun's nunchaku. Whether it was Rui Bang or Jingu Bang, Naruto wasn't sure. Torchwick tilted his head to avoid the following blast that came from Sun's weapon and knocked the monkey-like Faunus to the side with a hard swing of his cane. The thief got to his feet and reached into his pocket to pull out a small device. You stupid, filthy bastard, excuse of a house pet. Get your ass over here and help me. I have a few strays that need to be put down. Torchwick snarled into the communication device. He pocketed it and lifted his cane to catch both Blake's sword and bladed sheath when she tried to get a sneak attack on him. Nice try, kitty cat, but you should have walked away when you had a chance. Torchwick smirked at the glaring girl. Never. Blake growled as Sun rushed up from behind her to deliver a flying kick to Torchwick's chest. The criminal stumbled back, but quickly recovered and dodged Naruto's descending stomp that managed to leave cracks in the ground. Blake! The cry from a familiar voice made the four combatants turn to see Ruby standing on the roof of the warehouse Blake and Sun were perched on earlier. Blake's eyes grew wide in surprise and concern. Ruby? She asked. Sun and Naruto exchanged quick looks before they returned their attention to Torchwick. Oh, hey Red. Torchwick called with a smirk on his face. Aren't you out past your bedtime? Ruby was distracted by something behind her, so she failed to see Torchwick raise his cane and fire off a large blast from his cane. The shot hit the young team leader and the criminal let out a gleeful cackle. Naruto was concerned for both Ruby and, oddly enough, a little bit for Torchwick. The thief had taken a bit too much joy in making that shot. Something had snapped and part of Naruto wanted to know what. Ruby! Blake cried out. Her amber eye slit and she leapt at Torchwick with a murderous gleam in her eyes. She was going to carve the criminal's innards out with her bare claws if needed. Dirty blows like that were part of the reason Blake had left the White Fang. While Sun charged in to back Blake up, Naruto turned towards the ocean as three more bullheads made their way towards the shipyard. Oh, come on! Naruto groaned when the doors opened to reveal more White Fang grunts armed to the teeth. They dropped down from the bullheads and started to fire at the three teens. Blake and Sun were forced to seek cover and Naruto ignored the bullets pelting his body as he turned to a nearby container. He grabbed onto the metal doors. The doors let out an ear-piercing squeal as he ripped them off their hinges. Naruto used the container doors as makeshift shields from the bullets while he made his way over to Sun and Blake's position behind a concrete barrier. Some metal shield for ZE lovely couple? Compliment of ZEUs for a wonderful first night out, Naruto said as he drove the metal doors into the ground so they would not fall. Blake gave him a look of mild annoyance, but said nothing as the warped metal protected them from the hail of bullets while Sun grinned and gave him a thumbs up in gratitude. Any other words that were about to come out of their mouths died on the tips of their tongues as Penny, the strange girl they'd met a few days ago, dropped down with blades hovering behind her back. She used the blades to decimate the forces of the White Fang with ease. They watched Penny plow through what had to be at least 30 grunts lined up and firing at her. The ginger-haired girl ignored their bullets and continued to utterly thrash the faunus. Their jaws dropped when the orange-haired girl used two blades to pull herself back to the warehouse. The blades embedded in the warehouse wall acted as anchors while the rest of Penny's weapons began to circle rapidly in front of her extended palms. A green orb about the size of a medicine ball grew between the circling swords and Penny pulled her fists back. Her eyes narrowed as she thrust her fists forward and green orb became a massive green beam at two of the bullheads. One was sliced down middle and exploded midair while the other lost a wing and impacted with the ground. The last bullhead turned to flee, but it looked like Penny wasn't in the mood to let them run. Penny threw her swords at the retreating bullhead, where they impaled the hull with ease. Penny wrapped her hands around something, and under a closer look, Naruto saw wires. The oddball girl he'd met a few days prior yanked on the wires hard. The bullhead was pulled down from the air and skid along the ground. Penny recalled her swords and smiled proudly as the bullhead exploded in a blaze of fire. Whoa! Sun's awe was shared by both Naruto and Blake as the three stared wide-eyed at the girl. She didn't even look tired. I like her. Naruto grinned as the bullhead exploded on impact. He kicked the two metal doors down and scowled when he saw Torchwick climb onto another bullhead that quickly flew off. Damn, there he goes! Naruto cut off as a loud bang drew his attention away from Torchwick's retreat. A shipping container flew at Penny and the girl raised her hands to stop it. She was carried off when the container's momentum won out, though she made an impressive indent in the metal box in her effort, and the three teens were forced to duck lest the container take their heads off as it flew past. The shipping container and Penny were driven through the warehouse wall, creating a large cloud of smoke as they did, as well as a loud crash. Naruto, Sun and Blake rushed from their cover over to Penny when she climbed out of the hole and dusted herself off. Ruby dropped down from above and looked her friend over. "Are you okay?" Ruby asked, turning her new friend this way and that. "Don't worry, Ruby. I told you before, I'm combat ready." Penny smiled widely at the girl. She hiccuped and covered her mouth with an apologetic look in her eyes. "Still, what the heck caused that, incoming?" Sun cried out as he tackled Blake to the side when he noticed another container flying at them. Ruby did the same for Penny while Naruto ran at the approaching container. He ducked his head down and brought his arms up over his face as he intercepted the flying metal box with a rough shoulder check. The container caved inwards with a loud screech when it collided with Naruto's slightly glowing body and dropped to the ground as it was immediately stopped. "Okay, that's smarted." Naruto grunted as he pulled himself from the caved-in shipping container. He hopped onto it and glared at the person that was approaching them from the direction that the containers had come from. It was a man that easily stood at a whopping 6.5 feet. The man was built like a freaking tanker, his bare chest easily 3 times as wide as Naruto. Muscles rippled with each step he took. His hair was a wild and long dark brown that cascaded out from his head like a lion's mane, and his eyes were crazed gold. Tattooed into his massive left pectoral was the insignia for the White Fang. "Belladonna!" The man's voice called out and echoed through the night. "You've been a bad kitty." Eyes turned to Blake, who had a horrified gaze locked on the newcomer. "Blake? Who is this guy?" Ruby asked softly as she prepared Crescent Rose for a fight. Likewise, Sun brought Rui Bang and Jingu Bang together in their pole form while Penny twitched when she tried to get up. Ruby pushed the girl back down with a frown. "Penny, stay put." "But I am combat ready." The orange-haired girl protested. She hiccuped again. "You were just attacked by a shipping container, you can sit this one out, kiddo," Sun said to her before he looked at Blake. "So, I take it this guy was someone you were close to in the phone?" "Not even in the slightest." Blake had a sour look on her face at the thought. She drew her weapons and glared at the smirking faunus that approached them. "His name is Shino and he's the White Fang's enforcer." "I'm the second lieutenant now," Shino said proudly. He lifted his knuckles up and cracked them. "And guess what? Bossman doesn't want you back anymore, since you've become such a human lover and betrayed him on the train. You're officially free game, and I've been dying to pound another pussy." Blake glared at him and lifted her blade. Sun and Ruby stepped up beside her with their weapons at the ready. Naruto jumped down and landed in front of the man before he could take another step. "You're not hurting my friends," Naruto informed the giant. Shino's head flew back and he barked out a laugh. "How adorable, you left us and found yourself some meat shields." Shino smirked at Blake and raised his hand over his shoulder. The hand balled up and swung out. Naruto's head was snapped to the side and he was sent flying back. He made a matching hole next to the one Penny had made moments before. The smoke from Naruto's impact with the warehouse wall cleared and a brick fell to the ground. A beat of silence passed before Ruby nervously looked to a pale Blake. So, what can he do?" "He can increase his strength to 5 times above average." Blake swallowed and clenched her sheath and katana, gamble shroud, tightly. "But could you blame her?" She knew Shino was strong, but to see him backhand the class powerhouse through a building was a bit nerve-wracking. 10. Shino's smile rose as he vanished in a blur and reappeared in front of the 3 teens. "It's 10 times now. I divert my aura throughout my body to increase the strength of every cell within." I run faster, jump higher, and, most importantly, hit harder. Get away from my friend. Penny called out as she sent one of her blades at the Faunus enforcer's head. Shino lifted his hand up and caught the blade before it could make contact with his skin. Cute. Shino crushed the metal in his hand and let it drop to the ground. He tilted his head to the side when Sun hit him with his staff. Shino looked the monkey-tailed boy over and grinned at him. Well, you move on so fast, Belladonna. I never thought of you as a loose pussy. Don't talk about my friend that way. Ruby cried out as she swung the blunt end of her scythe at the massive Faunus. Shino's head turned sideways as he had yet to move Sun's staff from his head. His grin was still present and a chuckle escaped his lips. All so eager to get killed. Shino grabbed the pole-like weapons and yanked them in, causing the two wielding the weapons to be brought close together. Shino released their weapons and grabbed them by their heads before he slammed the two into the ground with a smile on his face. The smile left his face as a cut appeared on his cheek from Blake's sword. Shino reached out and grabbed Blake by her throat before he lifted her off the ground. Blake's eyes went wide as the small nick healed. I was going to enjoy you before I killed you, but it seems like doing so would be a hazard for my health. Shino tightened his grip on Blake's throat and her hands clutched at his fingers, her weapons clattered on the ground as she struggled for air. I told you that you're not hurting my friends. Shino arched one of his massive eyebrows up when a glow came from the hole that he'd sent the whiskered teen through moments before. A new hole was made directly in front of him when the boy burst through the warehouse's wall and his right fist barreled into Shino's cheek. The blow sent Shino flying through many shipping containers like they were made of sticks and twigs instead of steel. Freed from Shino's unbelievably tight grasp, Blake fell to the ground and Naruto landed beside her. Blake coughed harshly and gasped for air once she pushed herself to her hands and knees. With watery eyes, caused by all sorts of factors, Blake looked up at Naruto gratefully in few differences to his appearance. A thin, faint red line of blood poured from the right corner of his mouth to the end of his jaw, but that was the only sign that Naruto had taken any damage. Well, the blood was all she could make out due to the contrast the color had with his definitely glowing golden skin. It wasn't a light hue like before, and instead was like a full-blown beacon of golden light. Naruto's eyes, now a blinding gold instead of deep blue, met her amber orbs. Are you all right, Belle? Blake coughed once more and nodded while she rubbed her throat. Good. Naruto gave her a small smile. It would have made her blush if not for the fact Blake was still trying to breathe properly. That and the small trail of blood was a bit off-putting. Naruto looked back to where he launched Shino and his smile fell while his eyes flashed. Keep the others back. It's been a while since I've fought someone who could make me bleed. Before Blake could ask what he meant, Naruto pushed down on one foot and shot forward. The ground he drove his foot into had crumpled and formed a small crater. Blake stared at it for a moment with her hands still around her neck. What the heck kind of semblance did that? A moment later, Haku appeared beside her in one of his mirrors. He helped Ruby sit up while Kurama and Sasuke dropped down from the roof of the warehouse. Sasuke assisted Sun and Kurama went over to pick up Penny. Wow, kid, what's got you so stiff? Kurama asked as he picked the girl up. Penny tilted her head. I believe that I am running at 63% efficiency after Ruby tackled me to the ground. Aha! Kurama mumbled before he carried her over to rest by the others. Ruby has a small concussion and Sun managed to flare his aura before he hit the ground, Haku said as he looked up from where he knelt at Blake's side to check her throat. He smiled at the cat Faunus. You certainly didn't want to make not worrying about you easy, did you? Blake looked down in slight shame. The injuries her friend suffered all could have been avoided if she hadn't run away like that. She looked up when Sun put a hand on her shoulder and gave her a grin. He was joking, Blake. Sun chuckled. He looked towards the direction that Naruto had run off. Will the little dude be alright? Like he said, it's been a while since he's fought someone that could make him bleed when he was using the will of fire. Sasuke shook his head. Kakashi would have him doing D-ranks for months. Oh yeah. Kurama agreed with a nod. What are you talking about? Blake asked with a hoarse voice. What's a will of fire? How did you know Dash? That you were here? I felt a surge of aura over this way. Kurama cut in quickly while he checked Penny's aura. He gave the ginger girl a strange look and hummed thoughtfully. You're a strange girl, kid. Is that bad? Penny asked. No, just different. Naruto's semblance, Haku said as he reached into his sash and pulled out a small canteen. Here, drink some water, it will help soothe the soreness in your throat. Blake took a drink and then looked over towards the two fighting beings. What does his semblance have to do with anything? Naruto's semblance, dubbed the Will of Fire, is powered by Naruto's will. His aura reserves are nearly as endless as my own, Kurama said. We have abnormally large reserves, and as such, our semblance are very unique. My sensory is nearly unmatched and transfer makes me a deadly opponent, since I can drain someone's reserves to absolutely nothing. Naruto's Will of Fire, however, well, I'd rather have to fight myself than fight him. You got in a lucky shot. Shino snarled as he caught Naruto's punch in his hand. He pulled the boy in and drilled his knee into Naruto's gut. The whiskered teen gasped and stumbled back, his defense down as he tried to regain air. Naruto took a punch to the head that sent him tumbling along the ground before he started to rise. He was currently fighting with 8 times his normal strength and durability, but Shino's dense cells were hard to keep damaged. Every counter that the Faunus got in gave him time to heal from a blow Naruto had dealt. At least now Naruto knew why his classmates felt so annoyed or irritated when they sparred with him. Well, that combined with the pranks he pulled on them usually caused them irritation. Irritation anyway. This is pointless, boy. You got in one good shot, but you can't win, Shino said as he glared at the whiskered brat that had dared to defy him. The lion-like Faunus spread his arms. I am the perfect warrior. You cannot defeat me. Maybe not, but I won't stop, until I know my friends are safe. Naruto grit out as he held his cracked, if not broken, ribs and glared at Shino's golden eyes with his own. He grit his teeth and let out a yell as he charged at the Faunus with his hand brought back. Shino shook his head and delivered a barrage of blows to the blonde, finished with a roundhouse kick that sent Naruto soaring through a shipping container. Shino lowered his leg and walked over to the boy as he started to get up. With a snarl, Shino lifted a foot up and slammed it down into Naruto's back. I will kill you, boy. It is in your best interest to stay down. Shino warned the young teen. I will make it quick and painless if you do. Naruto grit his teeth and pushed himself up despite the weight on his back. Shino smirked and punted Naruto in the side, knocking him into a container. As Naruto stumbled off, Shino appeared before him and grabbed the boy by his throat. I am only here for Belladonna, and as far as we know, she isn't even on your team. Why do you fight so hard for a criminal that isn't on your team? Shino asked out of genuine curiosity. Because, she's my friend. Naruto grit out as he glared through one eye at the Faunus. His eyes squeezed shut as Shino lifted him up and drove him head first into the ground. Then, you are a fool. Shino exclaimed as he grabbed the boy by his ankle and whipped him over at another container. The metal creaked in protest as it folded inward from Naruto being thrown into it. Shino smirked and, figuring that was enough, turned to walk back over to his intended target. The sound of metal creaking accompanied the groan of a young man made Shino stop and look back to see Naruto push himself from the container and land on the ground. The whiskered blonde rose from the ground shakily and limped towards Shino with a determined glint in his golden eyes. His hair started to flicker and blow in a non-existent wind as it started to glow with aura. Leave, my friends, alone. Naruto grunted out as he limped towards the furnace. You stupid boy. I was willing to let you live, but you leave me no choice. Shino shook his head as he walked back towards Naruto and flicked his fingers out, allowing claws to extend over his fingernails. He stood in front of Naruto, grinned and straightened his hand before he pulled it back. Now do something useful and die so I can go kill those other brats. The clawed hand was thrust forward like a missile. Naruto's left hand shot up and caught Shino's wrist in a vice-like grip. The whiskered blonde's hair burned with aura and his eyes flew open. The ocular organs were a solid gold that glared at the shocked Shino's cat-like eyes. Naruto's hand tightened and Shino's wrist snapped. Shino roared with pain and threw a punch with his other hand. Naruto caught the attack and squeezed. A sickening crunch filled the air as he broke the Fauna's hand. Shino dropped to his knees as he let out another pain-filled bellow. Naruto released the useless hands and stepped back while Shino shuddered with anger and pain. You little brat, I'll kill you. Shino snarled, his eyes slitted as he got back to his feet. His hands slowly flexed and his eyes winced as he tried to form a fist. Naruto avoided the overhand chop and drove his elbow into Shino's side. Ribs cracked and Shino let out another roar of pain. Naruto ignored the Fauna's pain as he dropped to a knee and embedded his fist into Shino's gut. The Golden Huntsman in training felt no sympathy or pity for the one that threatened and harmed his friends. All he felt was vindication in his actions and a need to be as ruthless as possible. This was a point Naruto needed to drive home here and now. The whiskered blonde pulled his fist back as his beefcake of an opponent doubled over. Naruto dropped to his back and his fist flew up to strike the Fauna's hard in the chin. Shino's head snapped back and a tooth flew out of his mouth. Shino's right leg planted itself firmly in the ground so that he wouldn't go flying. The Fauna slipped down just in time to see Naruto spin from his back into a low sweep that would have knocked him off of his feet. Shino jumped up over the sweep kick and smirked. The smirk fell into a look of shock when Naruto quickly twisted around on his hands and delivered a powerful mule kick that sent Shino into the air like a rocket. Naruto twisted back to his feet and then jumped up after the Fauna's. Naruto's eyes narrowed and he brought his right fist down. Up. Naruto's right fist struck Shino's stomach, launching the Fauna's into the clouds. Up. The left fist replaced the right as Shino doubled over and coughed up blood. Down. A punch to the back of the head made Shino spin in the air and start to descend. Down. Another downward punch sent Shino back towards Vale. Naruto descended after him and brought his left fist back. Left. Shino's head turned to the left as a punch struck him in the cheek. Cheek. Right. Shino's head turned right and a canine flew out of his mouth. Left. 3 teeth were forcibly removed as they neared the ground. Right. Naruto dislocated the Fauna's jaw. Backhand. Shino started to spin as he descended towards the ground. And hammer shot. Feet before they hit the ground, Naruto's hands intertwined over his head and were swung down. Shino's body collided with the cement with a loud bang and smoke shot up in a cloud. When it cleared, Shino was in the center of a crater that was 10 feet deep, his body stuck in the ground and his eyes barely open as he struggled to remain conscious. Naruto stood over him, his hair flickered like a flame and his eyes narrowed as he glared down at the Fauna's extremist. It's assholes like you that give Fauna's a bad name, he said to the barely conscious Fauna's. I don't know if you'll stay in prison long or if you'll still be here by the police arrive, but when you see your bosses again tell them that you lost to a human. Tell them that you failed to kill a teenager. Tell them that I'm not afraid of them and I will be waiting for them to try something stupid. Tell them that my name is Naruto Uzumaki and if they want to hurt any of my friends, they have to go through me first. And believe me, pal, if they get through me, they're not going to make it to a hospital. That's a promise. Naruto left Shino in the crater with a scowl on his face. He stopped at the edge and turned back to the unconscious Faunus. You should count yourself lucky that I need to send a message and that I'm not a criminal like you. If I were, your head would be the message. And it would be mailed in a box. Naruto returned to his friend's side of the shipyard. Once his semblance had dropped back to the base setting, he realized that bones ached and his muscles protested any movement, but he continued to stand well until after the Veil police had arrived. Many if not all of the White Fang grunts were arrested and, as Naruto thought, Shino got away. Penny had vanished among the confusion, which worried Ruby until Kurama had reassured her that the odd girl was fine. Blake! The group looked up as Yang and Weiss walked up to them. Yang had a smile on her face at seeing her partner again. That smile fell as she realized Ruby had several bandages around her head and Naruto's clothes looked like they'd gone through a meat grinder. Blake and Sun also looked a bit scuffed up, but not as badly as the other two. Yang rushed over to her sister first and began to examine her like a mother hen. Ruby managed to get past her sister and stood between Blake and Weiss. Weiss, Blake explained everything and she's really sorry that she lied, and dash. Ruby's rambling was silenced by her partner's raised hand as she walked past her to Blake and looked at her cat ears. Weiss' eyes dropped down to meet Blake's. Do you know how long we've been looking for you? Weiss' voice was cold as she spoke. Blake looked down and rubbed her arm as Weiss continued. 12 hours. 12 hours. And do you know what I did in those 12 hours? I thought long and hard about what you told me. About what you told us. And you know what I realized? Weiss, I don't care. Blake looked at the Schneeris in mild shock. Weiss crossed her arms. You say you were part of the White Fang, that you're a Faunus, fine. Whatever. That's not who you are now. You're a part of Team RWBY, and I realized I was more hurt that you didn't trust us with this secret than I was over the secret itself. Weiss, about the White Fang, you dash, Blake tried again. Weiss raised her hand. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I just want you to know, next time something like this comes up, I hope you trust us to help you. Weiss took a moment to direct her glare at Sunday and not some no-good, rapscallion of a thief. Sun chuckled weakly before he pointed at Naruto. He helped. Oi! Dude! Naruto squawked in outrage. He just fought a literal beefcake and probably broke at least 5 or 6 bones. He was so going to be sore tonight. Speaking of which. Yang looked at Naruto with her hands on her hips. What the hell happened to you, Whisker Boy? No more cold shoulder? Cool. Naruto grinned weakly when she chuckled at his pun. Met a guy who could make me sore in all the wrong ways. You poor baby. Do you need a kiss to make it better? Yang asked with a small smile. I wouldn't be opposed to it. Naruto chuckled at his joke and then winced in mild pain. His eyes shot open wide as a pair of lips pressed against his. Ruby and Weiss' jaws dropped while Blake's eyebrow quirked upwards. Sun grinned and gave Naruto a thumbs up of approval as the whiskered blonde was released from the kiss. That was for helping my sister and my partner, Yang said as she traced one of Naruto's whisker marks before she turned to her teammates with a smile. Let's go back to Beacon and get some shut-eye. We got class in the morning. The rest of Team RWBY nodded in agreement and left, leaving Naruto stunned and staring off into the distance. Sun laughed as he waved his hand in front of his friend's face, not getting a reaction. Called it. Haku smirked and held his hand out. Kurama scowled and Sasuke grimaced as they pulled out some lean and slapped it into the androgynous boy's hand. I was so sure he'd focus on Nico's. Kurama grumbled. What with his redhead fetish and all? We're doomed if they procreate. Sasuke sighed. Naruto just blinked. What just happened? That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.